Warning, this video is minimally edited because I am lazy. Enjoy anyhow.
Caitlyn fans are doing a bigger disservice to her character than any hater ever could. Let me just start this off by saying you can hate whoever you want. We all have different experiences, we all have different perspectives. And I understand that feeling of wanting to be defensive when someone hates your favorite character, but you just gotta learn to let it go. But honestly, this isn't even just getting mad when someone doesn't like your favorite character. This is straight up not allowing the narrative to develop your favorite character because you don't want them to be seen as a bad person. Trying to actively rewrite the narrative and trying to make the show say something it's not because you're scared of your favorite character getting criticism is insane. And I want to give Caitlyn fans some benefit of the doubt. Caitlyn was getting a lot of unnecessary vitriol and hate in season 1. I get it. But too many of y'all are going into season 2 with that same season 1 mindset, thinking that she's just getting hate for no reason. If someone dislikes Caitlyn at this very point in time, they have all the reason in the world to do so. In the same way that if someone dislikes Jinx, they got all the reason in the world to do so. That doesn't mean that those people don't understand their characters. They might not, but that's not an inherent side of not understanding a character. However, when you're getting to the point where every single bad thing that Caitlyn does, you feel the need to justify or even defend, God forbid, yeah, no, you've completely missed the point of the show and you're actively not a fan of that character in my eyes. And if you're the type of person that turns any conversation about a character's flaws into an interrogation of whether or not the person calling out their flaws is calling that character a villain, or whether or not they understand why the character is doing those bad things, you should not be watching something like Arcane. You're frankly too soft and too media literate to be watching something like Arcane. And yeah, obviously this is not all Caitlyn fans. There are plenty of y'all that are fully aware of the fact that the narrative is trying to show that what she's doing is crazy right now and not justifiable in any way, shape, or form. And I'm glad that y'all exist, but a lot of y'all are just ruining her character for others. I won't lie. Anyways, if you guys want some interesting conversations about Caitlyn that might make you uncomfortable, I recommend you go watch Lucky Lefty's video on Caitlyn. It's very interesting and has a lot of things I want to say but wasn't competent enough to.
Oh, Jace is the reason why they can't have a happy ending. Oh, Vi is the real Jinx. Beep! Wrong answer, forehead.
Yes, you could absolutely make the argument, at least in Jace's case, that if he hadn't made Hextech, a lot of the events in the show wouldn't have gone down how they went down. But there is a bigger culprit here that y'all are ignoring, and it is the Council. Numerous times in the show, in season 1, we see that the Council is constantly accelerating the use of Hextech, which creates a bigger divide between Piltover and Zaun. It's almost as if with no Hextech to exploit, everybody has a better life, because Zaun can actually end up catching up to Piltover, which is why I personally believe it wouldn't have mattered if Silco got that peace deal. Zaun was so lacking in resources compared to Piltover that they didn't need direct control over Zaun to still be oppressing them. And I get it, right? Arcane has always been about interpersonal relationships. That is always what made it so special, but we don't just ignore the real life politics. If anything, that felt like a very clear parallel to how CEOs and companies and rich people in the real world could absolutely take massive strides towards trying to prevent or slow down global warming, but they choose not to because it takes money out of their pockets. Like, I'm so sorry, I do not give a fuck that that council got bombed, and too many of y'all don't hate the council enough for me because they are quite literally at the root of nearly everything that goes wrong in the show. If you guys had money for every time I made a connection between two medias that had nothing to do with one another, you guys would probably have like at least, I don't know, 10 pounds, $10, whatever it is. And today I am doing that again. I want to talk about how Wicked Part 1 and Arcane Season 2 really bring to light how differently black and white people tend to interpret media, even if the story is not explicitly about racism. Now, firstly, I'd like to go ahead and clarify, neither black people or white people are monolith. Yes, these are generalizations, but I'm not doing it to say, oh, all white people are bad, or all black people think like this. I'm just using it as an insight into how your lived experiences can make you interpret something differently. Now, firstly, we have Wicked Part 1. Now, I'm not a Wicked fanatic. I don't know everything about Wicked, but I do know that it's like the prequel to The Wizard of Oz. And something I found is that Glinda, a character who basically winds up being complicit in the oppression of Elphaba, tends to get a lot more slack and sympathy from white people than she does black people. Now, I'm not saying this is a wrong way to interpret the story. I don't believe there's any moral superiority to interpreting a character as sympathizable in this case or not, but rather it's more just a testament to how our lived experiences can change how we view things. A lot of black people may not sympathize with a character like Glinda or may be more critical of her because we don't really get a chance to be in Glinda's position. We are very rarely the ones who are watching as others are oppressed. Most of the times we're the ones on the receiving side of the oppression. In turn, that's not to say white people can't be oppressed for other things, by the way, but in turn, a lot of white people might feel like they relate to Glinda because they feel like they're also in a system where they have to be complicit where they don't want to be. Well, Digi, how does this relate to Arcane? Well, obviously Arcane explores themes of dictatorships, fascism, martial law, and the character that's caused the most controversy is Caitlyn. And again, not to say that there is an inherently wrong way to interpret the story, but the people I do see tending to sympathize with her more are white people. A lot of the people I see downplaying what she did or trying to make it seem as if you're enforcing some sort of moral superiority complex if you dislike what she did are white people. A lot of the people I feel most seen by and most heard by in the Arcane fandom with their takes about Caitlyn are black people. And again, this is not a 100%, one size fits all way to approach this. It's just interesting. Nothing in Arcane is really explicitly about race, but there is still a fairly clear distinction in how black people and white people are approaching certain characters. And maybe the same play is happening in effect as it was with Glinda. Maybe some people are more comfortable relating to Caitlyn because they feel as if they align with her more in terms of their privilege or their status in life. Well, maybe
maybe not to the extent of being a dictator, but you know, you get what I mean. And on the other hand, especially with topics like police brutality at play, a lot of black people might just not fuck with the character and be unable to fuck with her once that line was crossed. I mentioned it in my previous video about Arcane, but during the opening segment of episode 4, immediately my brain got like inspiration from the BLM protests, and I don't know if they actually did that, but that's immediately what my mind went to. I mean, it's obviously it's a given, like if you live a different life to someone, you'll take things differently, but it's just so interesting to see it at play. To further add on, I'm seeing a lot of people talk about how this is great lesbian representation and that, but I feel like a lot of you are missing out on the fact that black lesbians exist. I mean, lesbians of color in general, but especially black lesbians, who absolutely justifiably so might not look at this as positive representation, especially because of the things that they've personally been through, not only for being a lesbian, but for also being black. And I think there's a lack of intersectionality in these conversations. Obviously not to shame you if you're happy with the representation, but to just acknowledge that, you know, your experience isn't the only one out there. And I'm gonna repeat this because I know I'm gonna see it in the comments. No, I'm not saying that only black people can take things a certain way or only white people do this. I'm just saying I'm seeing a pattern. Not everyone acts the same way, but I'm noticing a pattern. Low-key, something I've been thinking of that I feel like really would have turned Caitlin's character around for me. And before I say this, I want to preface that this is just my opinion, and also I'm not a writer. I'm not telling anyone how to do their job. I just feel like this would have been an interesting route to go down, is to have her go down like a little Hermandiger arc. Like obviously not beat for beat, but just have her be in Zahn and see what she's doing and see how that's affecting people, right? I feel as if not only would it make it much less jarring when she inevitably switches back to the good guy side, it would have been a nice cyclical way to come back to that one line she says in Act 1, I understand how easy it is to hate them, for her to come to understand how easy it is for Zahnites to hate her. It'd just be so much more interesting to have Caitlyn, who's so dead set on revenge, realizing that what she's doing is actually more likely to fuel situations that got her mother killed in the first place. Like she's probably created 50,000 Jinx herself, all in the act of trying to catch one. And it really does lend itself nicely to the final conversation that Jinx and Caitlyn have, where she realizes this was never about her, and whether or not her mother was in that seat, it wouldn't have changed what Jinx had done. As a matter of fact, none of it was a personal attack against her, but rather a symptom of an issue that Piltover inherently thrives off of. But I don't know, I just feel like it would have been a cool way to do it. Also, whenever I say I feel like Caitlyn didn't really receive any consequences for keeping Zahn in a borderline apartheid state, people always assume I want to see her like tortured or I want to see her in jail for the rest of her life. And like, no, not at all. I'm not fucking crazy. However, it would be really cool to see her giving back to Zahn. I know I keep bringing it back to Hermandiger, but you know, whatever Hermandiger does in the alternate universe to make it so that Zahn and Piltover are on more equal standings, but in the current universe, especially since she definitely has all the money to do it. So, I mean, I don't know, she might not be sniping anymore, so at least let her have a little activist arc. And I know y'all gonna come in the fucking comments, but their forces in League. I don't give a fuck about League. I don't give a shit. I don't give two shits. Technically, Jace is canonically dead, but is he erased from League? No, so shut up. It's been a while since season 2 has ended, and I think I finally found out what made me feel so weird about the scene with Vi in the jail cell in Act 3. It's not the fact that she doesn't chase after Jinx, or even the fact that she has sex with Caitlyn in that cell. But let me walk you through the scene step by step to show you where it starts to feel odd. So initially when I'm watching the scene, the fact that Vi approaches trying to recruit Jinx rather than offering any condolences for what has just happened to her did kind of set off my red alarms a little bit. Just a little bit, because she is still trying to offer Jinx support. She's telling her that she can rewrite her story, but it just feels a little clunky, especially for someone like Vi, who we know is very good at comforting people. But you know what? That quickly left my mind, because Vi literally just runs and hugs Jinx immediately. So it's like, you know what? That's not even in my mind anymore. But then obviously Jinx locks Vi in the cell and goes on the spiel about how there's no good versions of her and she can be with Caitlyn because she deserves to be. And here's the thing with that. Vi can see that this girl is entirely disheveled. She can see that she's not been eating for however long she's been here. And she also knows that Jinx hates Caitlyn. So at some point, one of these things should have been an inkling that something bad was going to happen. But here's the thing. I'm not even saying the issue is that Vi doesn't chase after Jinx. I would have absolutely been fine with the outcome of their conversation being Vi realizing that she can't always chase after Jinx. That's perfect to me. But that's not what happened. Instead, the writers have Vi take this weird approach of being mad that Jinx doesn't join them, and thus deciding that her going to find her sister was the wrong choice. Like, the first things out of her mouth are, I really believed she'd help. I was an idiot for trusting her. Go on, tell me you're right. I made the wrong choice. How is that the conclusion you came to? Like, for a while, I genuinely sat there and thought, is this the writer's way of telling us that Vi is fucking stupid? Because she's not. She's actually a very emotionally in-tune character. But for a while, they managed to convince me that she was stupid. Because how do you get that out of that conversation? It's not even that they're not allowed to have her be upset about the fact that Jinx has basically left her, but her upset feels so much more focused on the fact that Jinx wouldn't help, to the point where it feels as if it's not even about their relationship. It's more about the fact that she wanted to prove to Caitlyn that Jinx could be useful, which, like, no, right? That's not what we want to get out of that conversation, right? I think the best way to describe it is that, yes, visually we see that Vi is so worried for Jinx, we see that she cares about her so much, but verbally, it's like we're hearing the words to an entirely different scene. And don't get me wrong, I do feel their final scene together does sort of rectify this, but also, why is she still mad about it? Like, you can hear it in her voice when she picks Jinx up from the rubble. She's like, I guess she shouldn't have come back. Like, let me find out Vi really thinks Jinx locked her in that cell so she could go hate on herself and cut her hair. Vi, please. But it's not even Vi, it's the writers. It's not Vi. It just really sucks that a lot of the rushing and the cut for time makes it feel like Vi's character suffered the most in those final few episodes. I mean, I still love Vi. I just act like she got swapped out with an alternate universe character in those last 2 episodes because, I don't know. Let's talk about a very interesting plot point that I've not seen anyone bring up in relation to what Caitlyn does to Zahn in Act 1, Season 2. By now, you've probably heard the argument that Caitlyn wasn't trying to gas regular Zahn citizens, they were trying to gas Cambaran areas and Cambaran workers. And this argument is sort of used to justify or at least lessen the negativity of this action. But what I find ironic about this is that in the episode before the police brutality montage, we see an example of a Cambaran worker who is very clearly not happy with his predicament. He seems visibly intimidated by Smeech, and he's very obviously not valued by Smeech at all. So it makes you wonder, why would someone like that work with Smeech, especially since Smeech acknowledges that that guy is way smarter than him? And that brings me to the point that I see nobody discuss. How many job opportunities are there actually in Zahn? How many people have to work for the Cambarans because there is quite literally no other option? Like, especially after Silco, the only option I could think of is probably mining, and even then, like, come on. Anyhow, this is a really realistic and nuanced plot point. It happens a lot in real life. Unfortunately, not everybody who is a criminal does it because they're just, oh, people power hungry. Some people feel as if they're literally given no other choice. And I think especially the scene where this worker is found demonstrates the cold hard truth of police and police brutality. When Caitlyn and the strike team are faced with this low-level worker who's been tied up and choking from the gray, she's cold, she's aggressive, she's cocking her gun at him, and Vi looks at her like, what the hell are you doing? Because realistically, that man posed no threat to her, but in her eyes, it didn't matter. It's sad that such a subtle yet powerful plot point is looked over in favor for the argument that, oh, they were villains, so it was okay. Honestly, now that I think about it, it is funny that the group of people who will tell you you have no media literacy the most are the same group of people who can easily overlook plot points like this. But like, at the same time, I do feel kind of bad for y'all. You do sort of have to minimize and downplay the effects of what Caitlyn did in order to even remotely enjoy her character, because the story doesn't really do her justice in terms of her arc. So I do kind of get it, but at the same time, damn, that sucks for y'all. Let's talk about it, because I never took that scene as Caitlyn's apology to Vi, and I was surprised that so many people did. Now, don't get it twisted. The talk between Caitlyn and Jinx was actually one of my favorite scenes for Caitlyn, and I think it kind of did wonders for her character development that pretty much fell flat after Act 1, but at no point did I ever interpret it as an apology to Vi. Before Caitlyn talks to Jinx, and before she gives Vi essentially the option to go find Jinx, her and Vi have an argument in which Vi says who decides who gets a second chance. And I think this is a great breakthrough for Caitlyn, because is she in a place to decide whether or not Jinx gets a second chance after everything she's done? After gassing underprivileged workers, after putting Zahn in martial law, after inviting a warlord onto their shores? Can Caitlyn truly stand there and be the one to cast judgment onto Jinx with a clear conscience? And on top of that, when Jinx tells her, you know, I didn't know your mom was in there, I think it serves as a great revelation to her. This was never about Caitlyn personally. This was always a symptom of the bigger issue. Everything from the memorial to the bombing of the council, it was never to do with her personally. When she comes to that revelation, I think it's finally the last piece she needs to let go of that anger. Which is why I was really surprised at the fact that people came to the conclusion that for some reason that was supposed to be about Vi. Like, I think if anything, that kind of waters down the importance of these scenes. It's also very funny because the people saying that give me the vibe of a mom who argued with her kid, and instead of apologizing, they just ask you what you want for dinner instead, or they just order you takeout. Like, that's the vibe it's given when people say Caitlyn did it to apologize to Vi. And like, I get it, right? Actions speak louder than words, crowd, but also you realize that words are important, right? Like, if words didn't matter, the show would be a fucking silent film. And it obviously isn't. Sometimes, and this is gonna be a hot take, you need to have characters to speak to each other for their dynamics to feel developed. No way she said that, bro. No way. Anyways, I think I've seen so many brain dead takes around Caitlyn and Vi to the point where I think I preemptively block anyone with a Caitlyn profile picture, and I feel so bad for doing that, but like, I can't open the comments every time and see the same dumbass surface level discourse because they're so desperately trying to defend two characters that got absolutely trashed on by the narrative. I'm sorry.
I can finally leave. Martha, I'm coming home, sweetie. I'm back in the fucking building again!
Oh my god, yeah, are you still talking about this? I don't celebrate Christmas, I like debating, and I'm getting paid for it, so leave me alone. Anyways, I can't be the only one who feels like this take fundamentally misunderstands all of the pairs mentioned in it, right? So correct me if I'm wrong, because it has been a while since I've watched either The Last of Us or Attack on Titan, but I'm pretty sure the whole general gist of both Gabby Aaron and Abby Ellie parallels was that they were the exact same in terms of actions, and the only thing that distinguished them was that we did not follow through their story. Like, it was intended to call out viewer hypocrisy, the fact that the only reason people were siding with Aaron and Ellie over the other two was because of the fact that we saw their stories, which I thought was really clever. Of course, what the viewers came to that conclusion was a different story. However, I did feel like it's pretty obvious that's what they intended, you know? How can you hate one character but not the other just because you saw more of the other? But ultimately, that's just straight up not what we see in Arcane with Caitlyn and Jinx, and I don't believe the writers even intended for that to be what people were taking out of it. In Attack on Titan and The Last of Us, especially in the latter, it seems like this parallel is a plot point to be like, how can you defend a character doing X, Y, and Z but be mad at character for A, B, and C? But trying to equate Caitlyn and Jinx just would not have the same effect. There are way too many variables. Arcane also doesn't set you up to have more of a favoring to one or another character. We don't necessarily see more of Jinx than we do of Caitlyn, and whilst we're definitely meant to sympathize with Jinx in season 1, I don't think we're meant to be rooting for her to do anything other than reunite with her sister. We're not rooting for her to stay with Silco because as much as he loves her, he's definitely not good for her. We're not rooting for her to fall deeper down that pit of mental illness and self-loathing. And other than a few ill-timed, ignorant comments, there's nothing really stopping us from rooting for Caitlyn. Now, if that's actually the conclusion the major audience came to, is a different story. You know, writer intent and audience reception, two different things. But all of this rambling just to say the argument doesn't work. It is not set up in the way that it's set up with Eren and Gabby, Ellie and Abby. We are not lured in to love Jinx before Caitlyn. We are introduced to them at the same time, and there's too many variables in their actions to sit there and genuinely say, oh, you know, they're equatable. Just, it doesn't work. And this is a little side rant, but I think it's so funny when this happens in fandoms, right? Somebody says an argument that everybody thinks is a game changer, it sounds like a deal breaker, and without actually questioning whether it sounds right or not, they'll just repeat it without even remotely thinking about it. So if you got to this part of the video, let me know in the comments an argument in a fandom that you think reminds you of this phenomenon, something that you think people just started saying because they thought it sounded smart. Yes, we're bringing Arcane analysis into 2025. If you don't like it, block me down. Anyways, I'm gonna try and make this video come less from a place of hatred and slander and more of a place of like genuine writing analysis and speculation, etc. And so today I'm gonna be tackling a question I've seen a lot of people asking both in my comments and on my For You page. Essentially, it's this idea of, well, why do we dislike Caitlyn for her villainous actions but like Silco and like Mbessa? Now, the first thing that pops into my head whenever I hear any of these points being made is that it's probably due to the fact that we know Silco and Mbessa aren't gonna get redeemed. They're the quote-unquote villains of the story, and whilst they can be sympathizable, we don't have to worry about a half-assed redemption being shoved into their arcs, making their character overall have less impact. And the fact that that was the first argument in my head shows how important it is for your villains, and I'm using that lightly because obviously, you know, no black and white stuff in Arcane, but the characters who take the role of villain in your story to be well written. If anything, it seems more important to make your villain characters more complex and well written than your good characters. At least the worst you can call a quote-unquote good character who is not well written is boring. But you know, when you have a villain character that's not well written, not only are they boring, they're a horrible person, and there's nothing to help you engage with that character. I mean, think about it. Caitlyn is allowed to be a bad person for about 3 episodes out of 9. 3 episodes out of 9 until she switches like a sleeper agent back onto the good side. Now compare that with Jinx, a character who's often said to be her parallel. Whilst there's also a time skip in her arc in season 1, we don't time skip to her second guessing Silco. We don't time skip to the show trying to do the best PR for her that they can. She's sympathizable, but she's also a train wreck. We're allowed to see her be a train wreck. The most we get out of Caitlyn is seeing her gas on. We don't see what happens during the 8 months of martial law rule. We don't get to see anything out of it other than a little montage at the beginning of episode 4 because the story realizes that it quickly needs to make her palatable to the audience again. That's just not an interesting way to consume a character. So ultimately, what's the conclusion? If you want people to like a villain character, you have to write them interestingly. You can't try to retroactively do PR for your character halfway through their villain arc and expect people to like them. Every character that Caitlyn is compared to that seemingly has their crimes quote-unquote overlooked is a character that's actually allowed to be a bad person throughout the duration of their screen time. Whilst Caitlyn's arc actually begins really interestingly because, you know, I'll give props where props are due, it pretty quickly ends up falling victim to this need to have Caitlyn be back in the hero role again. And so ultimately, when you have people looking back at her villainous actions, they're not going to see any interesting writing behind it, causing them to be more likely to focus on it as opposed to other possibly worse characters. Wow, it has been a while since I've done one of these, and it probably is very poorly timed considering the fanfiction that just came out that has everybody, rightfully so, in a bit of a frenzy. But you know what? What can we be in this world if not poorly timed? Anyhow, I wanted to make this video for a while, and surprisingly enough, no, it is not about Jinx, Caitlyn, or Vi. This time it's about Mel. Mel Medarda is a character that goes through something that I've talked about before, in relation to the fandom, not the show itself. And in simple terms, it is initially when a character gets mischaracterized by fandom, and then in turn people go all the way in the other direction of mischaracterization to sort of balance it out. For example, Papyrus from Undertale, who was initially characterized as this ooh sweet innocent cinema role, and then in what I can only assume was retaliation, people started characterizing him as a standoffish, more meaner version of what he really was, despite the fact that being kind, loving, and honestly somewhat innocent was a big part of his character. And the same exact thing has happened to Mel from my perspective. Now before I say this, I was never like a diehard Mel, Jace, Victor stan. I was always more in it for the sisters plot. However, I can notice that when the show first came out, there was a lot of people who characterized Mel as just like straight up inherently evil. And what sucks most of all is that there were definitely racial connotations to this, people only treating her as so evil because she was 1, black, and 2, a woman. There was also a lot of she gets in the way of my favorite ship vibes going on. Unfortunately, that always happens. But then in response, and I don't know when this started, I just started seeing it on my For You page around the time that season 2 came out, but there are a lot of people hikening her as entirely innocent and having done nothing wrong ever. And I get why. It's frustrating to see a character be hated on more, especially because of things that are out of their control, like race, etc. But I don't think that's exactly helpful either. I think stripping Mel of her wrongdoings, especially in a show that explores the nuance of stuff like this so deeply, is basically stripping her of her agency. I fear that Mel shouldn't have to be free from being bad in order to not have racism and misogynoir directed towards her. And I fear that the response to this being to say that, oh no, she's actually innocent, she's never done anything wrong ever, will actually just reinforce in these people's heads that it is okay to be racist if a black character is bad. And ultimately, from both sides, it's just a disservice to her character. Mel is honestly very nuanced and interesting, and she has an intriguing arc to watch through, and I feel like both sides, not the racists obviously, but the people who say she's entirely evil, the people who say she's entirely innocent, end up missing the point of her character. In conclusion, situation, let black women be a little bit manipulative without either demonizing them or entirely running to their defense. Did Vander parentify Vi? That's a complicated question and one I really want to discuss because whilst on paper he technically did, there's a lot more nuance to the situation that I feel like makes the situation different, and I think that nuance is something that is ignored when looking at the characters in Act 1 of Season 1 in general, so let's get into it. See, the typical thing with parentification is usually the fact that the parent should not have chose to have a child knowing that they would be put in a position where they had to assume adult responsibilities. And that's where Vander and Vi's relationship is different. Vander didn't choose to have Vi, rather he adopted her because her main caretaker died, and unlike in real life, I don't think orphanages exist in Zon. So he's been put in a pretty impossible situation, one where he has to make sure that these children are looked after whilst also still trying to maintain peace in Zon. As an unfortunate result, Vi, as the oldest, ends up having to share a lot of responsibility for the younger ones. When Vander puts that responsibility on her, it is absolutely unfair, but at the same time, is there any other choice? And ultimately, this circles back to a strong bit of nuance that I think everyone's missing. Whilst Arcane 100% has real-life aspects, the circumstances of the characters in Act 1 are typically a bit different than the circumstances of the viewer watching them. This also presents itself in how people criticize Milo and Powder in Act 1. Oftentimes, their behaviors and actions are sort of reduced down to being annoying or bratty or whatever, but this ends up undermining the severity of their situation. Yes, when Milo's antagonizing Powder, it's painful to watch, but at the same time, we're probably missing the fact that these interactions are underlined by a fear of not getting to see the next day or not having food on the table. They are also probably underscored by his own insecurities of being a detriment to the group, and of course, being a detriment to the group will probably get you killed. And this also happens with Powder. Even with people who are sympathetic to her, they tend to ignore the fact that her breakdowns aren't just a result of being obsessively attached to Vi. I mean, yes, she definitely has attachment issues, but it's also, again, underlined by this idea that if she gets left behind, she's going to die. She cannot survive on her own. And if they suddenly decide that she's no longer worth the risk of keeping around, she's fucked. All in all, I think the kids living in what is basically an active survival zone is often very overlooked, which sucks because it does provide a lot more understanding to their actions and why they behave the way they do. Milo's bullying isn't just being mean for the sake of being mean. Powder's breakdown wasn't just an entitled temper tantrum because she didn't get her way. Vander giving all of that responsibility to Vi wasn't because he was lazy and just wanted to shift it all onto her, it's because he quite literally had no other choice. These are actions that are coming as a result of children who have to live with the threat of death looming over their shoulder. In conclusion, fuck Piltover. I have a lot of people always asking me why don't I go as hard on Silco and Mbessa as I do on Caitlyn. And in part, I've kind of already answered this. To me, Silco and Mbessa are much more entertaining and engaging because the narrative isn't constantly trying to make excuses for them and isn't constantly trying to backtrack on their bad deeds, whereas with Caitlyn, they sort of baby her, so it's much more frustrating to watch. But honestly, after a lot of thinking, I think there's something more to it. I want to preface this by saying that as early as my first rewatch of Season 1 and Season 2 altogether, I did not like Silco. Like, I was never on his side. I respected how well he was written, but it was never like rooting for him thing. But as more time passes, the more people I speak to, the more I unpack my feelings about the political direction of Season 2, I start to realize that Silco is kind of used as a scapegoat in order to not fully hold the council accountable. I mean, think about it. Post Act 1 of Season 1, whenever something bad is happening to Zon, it is either Silco or an enforcer on Silco's payroll. In comparison, the council's flaws seem to be at best being ignorant and at worst being arrogant. Like, cool, we know they look down on Zonites, but the show doesn't actually go into how they perpetuate harm against Zonites, except in Act 1 where they insisted that whoever broke into the house be captured. In comparison, Silco, we see him blackmailing, threatening to kill kids, using child labor, killing people, etc. Like, the show at no point hesitates to demonize his approach to a free Zon. Now, this isn't to say that Silco isn't a nuanced character. He is, but it feels like his nuance comes more in the form of his relationship with Jinx rather than his ideology. All this to say, because it feels like the show is trying to make me think that Silco is worse than the council, it's actually like making me like him more. I don't know fully how to explain it. Maybe it's like reverse propaganda, but knowing that the show made an oppressed group and is actively trying to make me hate them more than the oppressors, I don't know, something just doesn't sit right with me. In all honesty, these feelings are probably exacerbated by the fact that Season 2 took the political dive that it did. Like, it's more of a retrospective thing, like, oh, now that I know that you did this in here, this feels weird. And as I said, the same thing sort of happens with Mbessa and Noxus in Season 2. Basically, everything Caitlyn does, indicting martial law, gassing people, it's all sort of pushed onto Mbessa, and the show tries to make us believe that Caitlyn's only issue was ever that she believed Mbessa, not any actions she took of her own volition. But yeah, if you ever wondered why I'm more tolerant of characters like Silco and Mbessa in comparison to Caitlyn, this is a big part of the reason why. Now that I've fully accepted the fact that I've straight up hyperfixated on critiquing Arcane, specifically Arcane Season 2, I'm just gonna go all out. And this time, unfortunately, I have to give my girl Jinx some of the smoke because, girl, I love you, but there were some things in Season 2 you did that had me looking like, who wrote you? Because it definitely wasn't the people who did it in Season 1. There's actually a line in Season 2 that I feel like perfectly represents my issues with Jinx and how they wrote her character, and it's when she's hanging out with Isha and she throws this thing at the wall after Isha's asking her to come join the fight, and she says so casually,
Jinx is dead.
I'm sorry, did I hear that right? Did you just have the character who was basically characterized by her identity issues and whose arc was solidified by accepting that she was a certain person, say that that person is now dead, and you had her come to that conclusion off screen? For a character like Jinx, having her say that Jinx is dead should be such a major thing. But not only does the realization feel entirely unearned because we've not seen Jinx do any soul searching or any introspection to come to this conclusion, but also it's such an inconsequential piece of dialogue. Like, I can't actually fathom what including this line as such a throwaway did for the story other than making my jaw drop when I heard it, and obviously not in the good way. But unfortunately, that's not my only issue with Jinx. See, I love Isha. I was rooting for her the minute I saw her in that one MV that was released before Season 2 came out. but she did not beat the plot device allegations at all. Looking at how her character is treated in retrospect, it's very obvious that they used her as a tool to control Jinx's mental health, which, let's not even talk about the implications that Jinx needed a child to heal her. Like, cool parallels to Powder and everything, but with the realistic depiction of mental health that season 1 took, if we're staying in the line of realism, this girl does not need a child to heal her. But you know what? At least their bond is sweet, wholesome, and enjoyable. No, where things really start to get egregious is them killing Isha off purely to justify having Jinx back at the bottom of the barrel, entirely suicidal again. Hence what I mean, they use Isha to control Jinx's mental health. Not only do I think that's just not great writing, I think it also ends up unintentionally ruining one of the themes that was established in season 1, and that theme is Jinx being a Jinx. Now, hold on, I'm about to say the word Jinx a lot. From my personal understanding, Jinx being a Jinx in season 1 is portrayed as a reflection of how her environment influences her actions. For example, Powder ends up jinxing things up in Act 1 because she quite literally is not built to live in a place like Zon. It's not built for children. In turn, she ends up making normal child mistakes that blow up into way bigger proportions, no pun intended. Seeing how badly she messes up, she adopts this idea that her being a Jinx is like this weird curse that she can't get rid of, and so if she's always going to mess things up, there's no point in trying to be good in the first place. That's just my personal interpretation. You can have your own, but in general, I feel like the consensus is Jinx being a Jinx was never meant to be this weird supernatural thing that made it so anyone that got near to her died. Rather, it was meant to be a reflection of her environment that turned into a self-fulfilling prophecy. She thought she would always jinx things up, so she didn't put any effort into trying to not jinx things up. So with this, you think that if Jinx got into a better and safer environment, perhaps she wouldn't see herself jinxing things up as much. Perhaps if she sees herself being able to do some good for once, it'll dispel this false narrative she has about herself. Except it doesn't, because what ends up happening is that despite her attempts to do literally everything right, Jinx still quote-unquote jinxes it up and Isha dies. Because of this, it reduces this idea of being a Jinx to this complex narrative structure about your environment and a self-fulfilling prophecy, and turns it into what Jinx was essentially describing it in Act 1, a curse.
You ever need a curse a sibling or a family or a society? My card. It's always me. Whether I'm pulling the pin or not, everyone who gets close to me dies.
And here I thought the show was just continuing from season 1, where Jinx still has this false idea about herself and her ability to be a Jinx. But in learning that she can do good and that she can fix things instead of always destroying them, she would eventually grow out of this understanding and break out of the cycle of self-hatred. But having the writers foreshadow Jinx meeting Isha as the nail in her coffin, was like such a gross undermining of what her character was in season 1. And not only that, it feels like the plot points that Act 1 was setting up, where Jinx learns to use her Jinxness for good instead of bad,
It was something I could fix.
just completely fall flat. But the worst part of it all is that it doesn't even feel that impactful. After Isha dies, yes, Jinx becomes suicidal for one episode before Echo manages to turn her around and she behaves in a way that she would have behaved regardless. We don't see her coming to the fight with any new knowledge or understanding of herself. Like, Isha sacrificing herself doesn't change anything from the plot to the development to the direction of these characters, so I just don't get it. It's like you have Jinx start at the bottom, you have her get a little bit better, you rip it from her, and then you have her get a little better again, and you do it off screen. I simply cannot wrap my head around it. As much as I did get enjoyment out of Jinx this season, a lot of the writing choices behind her are just sort of nonsensical to me. I still love her, but you know, my criticisms are rated E for everybody, so holy crap, this is a long one. Can we sit here and take a moment to appreciate just how tumultuous it must have been to be a diehard Vi fan throughout the release of season 2? My girl was getting slandered and let down throughout all acts by both the writers and the fandom. First, in Act 1, we have everyone blaming Vi for not letting Caitlyn shoot at a child. The people were calling her hypocritical because of her speech to Jace in season 1, and the worst of the worst were the people who were saying it was some sort of karma, or it was okay because she hit Powder when she was 15. It was so bad, I literally remember making a post where it's like, yes, I don't have to defend Jinx anymore, but now I have to defend Vi. And the worst part is, that wasn't even the last of it. Now, with Act 2, there wasn't much slander around Vi as a character, but I just know that if you are a true Vi lover, you were so mad about the fact that her pit fighter arc got reduced to just a montage. I wouldn't even say Vi is like my favorite out of all characters, and even I was heated about it. And what makes it even worse is that the intro really makes it seem as if they're gonna do some in relation to like Vi losing her identity or something, just for them to not do crap. But it doesn't even end there. In Act 3, not only does she basically become a side character, oh my god, they made an episode about the perfect universe and they killed her off in it. Someone at Riot HQ had something against Vi, I'm telling you. And this then prompted people to start saying that Vi was the real Jinx and that she's the reason why everything goes wrong. And I know you were in the trenches if you were a fan of her. And on top of that, she has a PTSD attack, which is valid, but that ends up being the stage they set to get Jinx to sacrifice herself. When I tell you I saw people mad, very mad. Not that I'm saying it's justified, but it doesn't help that she was pretty insignificant for the whole war arc. I mean, I hate Caitlyn, and even she had more use during it. Honestly, being a Vi fan after season 2 is the equivalent of holding on to that one stuffed toy you have that's completely torn to bits and is on its last legs, but you know what? You still keep it anyway because you love it and you have nostalgia. And honestly, me too. I don't even blame you. I know there are a lot of rumors going around about what the next installment of Arcane will be, but I have a different question. Not so much what will it be, but more so what direction will it take? It's no secret now that Season 1 and Season 2 had two very different approaches to telling the story of Arcane. Season 1 was a lot slower in comparison to Season 2, it was more grounded, and it was more focused on the characters and their relationships. Obviously, there was a focus on magic and action, but that took a bit of a backseat in comparison to everything else. Also, whilst its politics weren't exactly airtight, there were a lot more nuanced and in-depth than in Season 2. Whereas in comparison, Season 2 is very fast, some might even say rush, it's a lot more action and magic based, and a lot of the characters' relationships took a back seat in turn. And with my minimal information about League of Legends, there are definitely lots of stories with topics akin to the class oppression in Arcane, so there's the absolute opportunity to return to formula like with Season 1. But at the same time, maybe the reason they pivoted to a more action-based storytelling in Season 2 is because they wanted to set the standard for that in the rest of their installments. We also have the fact that there was a major cut down on the writers between Season 1 and Season 2, but ultimately, I personally hope they return to the type of stories they were telling in Season 1, but if they do keep with the Season 2 formula, I just hope it isn't rushed this time around. But what do you guys think? Do you think they're likely to try and tell us another type of Season 1 or Season 2 story, or hell, maybe they'll just mix it up and try both? I don't know. Let me know in the comments. I've seen many defenses for Caitlyn's character in Season 2. Some of them are good, a lot of them are bad, but here are the two main ones that I keep on seeing. 1, she's a complex female character and thus I'm misogynistic for not liking her. And 2, Caitlyn is a character that shows her feelings through her actions, not her words. That one is typically used to defend her reconciliation with Vi, or lack thereof. But here's the thing, I call BS on both of these, and I'll tell you why. Right off the bat, and I've made this clear multiple times, I don't think Caitlyn is a complex character at all. I will give flowers where flowers are due. She has the makings of a complex character in Act 1, and I think it's done pretty well for the most part. But I don't know, man, there's just nothing complex to me about a character who's continuously doing bad things and yet the narrative refuses to acknowledge it and then throws the blame onto another convenient entity like Pass the Parcel. I mean, even in Act 1 where I think she's at her best, they just straight up ignore the fact that Chem Barons used child labor, something they re-established in the prior episode, just so they could avoid the difficult conversation with the fact that Caitlyn definitely got some of those kids with that insanely cancerous gas, whilst also having the nerve to then show us a child in Piltover, a much more open and bigger space, being hit by Jinx's retaliation. You cannot convince me a character with this level of favoritism and pardoning by the narrative is complex. And then we have the argument of her showing things, not telling us things. So much of Caitlyn's arc is communicated to us through exposition, aka they will have her say something but do nothing to back it up in her actions. In episode 4, we're supposed to believe that she's against the unlawful arrests and excessive violence because the show tells us that she is, but does nothing to show us that she is. I'll remind you all that yes, she was manipulated by Ambessa, but ultimately the martial law was her call and is her operation, which means she is in full power to at least punish the enforcers who are seen enacting excessive police brutality, but she doesn't. We're just supposed to believe that she's against these mass incarcerations, these enforcers shooting and beating innocent Zonites, because the show told us that she was against it. We're supposed to believe that she distrusts Ambessa because the show tells us that she distrusts Ambessa. When Caitlyn bursts through the council doors claiming that she is a powerful, decorated officer, we're supposed to believe her, despite the fact that she was literally fired from her enforcer job in Season 1 because her mother did not trust her to do something as simple as watching the perimeter of her tent.
I already have a job.
No, you don't. After the attack, your parents spoke to the sheriff.
The argument that she's more actions than words is hilarious to me because no, she's not. They just did not care enough to have her properly reconcile with Vi. And even this bleeds into the complex character argument. A complex character will show you things. They will not tell you things and expect you to believe them with no proof. It's very much akin to writing an academic essay. You cannot just say things with no proof. You need to back up every point you make. It's the same thing in a show. But yeah, that's my personal take on those two arguments because I think I disagree with them the most in every sense of the word. Absolutely no hate to this commenter, but this is one of the many comments I've seen with this misconception and I wanted to clear it up, so let's get into it. One of the most common things I see in defense of Caitlyn gassing Zon is this idea that she did it as a lesser of two evils or she did it to prevent the full-scale invasion, which is not true. But I do think I get where this misunderstanding comes from. Ironically, it's one of the things I like about her arc and I think could have been great had it had more time. But essentially this idea comes from the fact that she was advocating against a full-scale invasion in episode 1 and she was emphasizing the fact that it was just one deranged person, not all of Zon.
Innocents will be caught in the crossfire.
So that's true. But obviously after the memorial attack, her opinion about it being just one deranged individual quickly disappears. But there's also another big factor that people tend to forget, and it's that Vi kinda accidentally gets into Caitlyn's head. She tells her to call off the invasion because of the fact that if they can do this much damage up here, imagine how badly they're gonna mess you up in their own territory.
You need to find a way to call off the invasion. This battle was on your soil. Down there, you'll be on their terms.
This then prompts Caitlyn to form a strike team using the gas that her mother hid away. The next time we see Caitlyn, yes, she is advocating against a full-scale invasion once again, but in this case, it's not for the reasons she did in episode 1, which is something I think is kind of clever. As she makes it known to the council that they are not prepared to make a full-scale invasion.
We aren't prepared for a full-scale invasion. The Undercity's attack proved that.
it's pretty obvious that her motivations from episode 1 to episode 2 have changed. No, now all she cares about is finding Jinx by any means. And this isn't even me slandering her. If anything, I'm clearing this up because I think it's one of the really clever things in her Act 1 arc, and it's kind of surprising to see so many people blatantly misinterpret it. TLDR, Caitlyn doesn't use the gas because she wants to invade Zaun in the safest way. She uses the gas because Vi accidentally got into her head about not being able to face Jinx or even the Ken Barons in their own territory, which I think makes narrative sense, right? Also, if she was doing it because she thought it was the lesser evil, it sort of would have made the point of making Ambessa behind the memorial attack kind of null. The whole thing is sort of meant to be the show's way of presenting Ambessa manipulating Caitlyn's emotions, so if Caitlyn was doing it for the greater good, that kind of renders that story point useless. Also, slightly off topic, has anyone noticed a certain demographic of Arcane fans trying to claim that the story was never political or never about oppression or doesn't base itself off of real life oppressive systems? Like, I think you guys know who I'm talking about, but I've seen this all over Twitter, Tumblr, TikTok, and it's genuinely hilarious to me. Like, how badly do you have to mess up a character for their fans to have to cope by saying that a major part of the story actually wasn't a major part of the story in the first place? Sorry, that was completely off topic, but I wanted to mention it because it's not enough to justify its own video. People characterizing Vi as the incompetent idiot and Caitlyn as the prestigious know-it-all is so funny to me, because you're telling me that little Miss Nepo baby, who probably had maids and servants to do everything for her growing up, is more competent than Vi, the eldest daughter of a family that lived in poverty and is very clearly shown to be extremely self-sufficient at a young age. You're telling me that's the dynamic you see between them? I mean, even just comparing their looks from when they were younger. Caitlyn is like a year older, I'm pretty sure, yet she looks 10 times younger than Vi. A testament to obviously their extremely different childhoods. I mean, don't misunderstand me, there's nothing wrong with this like wholesome idea that Vi can be more relaxed and laid back around Caitlyn, but a lot of you guys are just straight up reducing her into like a pet for Caitlyn. And I mean, I mainly blame the show for that, but god. Like, I do enjoy looking up Kate by fan media, but oh my god, everything post season 2 is just so icky and weird and reeks of classism. Oh, and don't even get me started on those how I think Arcane characters write posts. Why are all of the Zaunites' handwriting practically illegible when pretty much the majority of the geniuses in Arcane come from Zaun? Like, what's that about? Victor, Echo, Jinx, Singed. In fact, the only remarkably smart person in Piltover is Jace. In general, Piltover is filled with way dumber people than Zaun. Namely Caitlyn. I'm sorry, how does she have 2 whole militaries at her disposal and couldn't find a single drugged up teenager who was being weighed down by a child? Come on. How does this even turn into a Caitlyn slander post? I don't know. You know one thing that's really trifling about how they wrote Maddie in season 2? Arcane season 1 is something that prided itself on having a range of nuanced characters. Nobody was evil for the sake of it. People's immediate tagline to defend their characters is everyone's done bad stuff, which, bar Echo, is absolutely true. Even the characters that were unanimously hated, like Marcus, had a level of nuance to them. So to then turn around and have a character in season 2 that purely exists to be hated, it's not even just lazy, it's straight up dishonest to the theme set up in season 1. And it's not even as if she had narrative importance to be this irredeemably evil backstabber. It seems like they had her sleep with Caitlyn because they wanted to show some form of Kate by angst, and then turn around and had her become a spy so they wouldn't have to hold Caitlyn accountable for her fickleness in relationships. She's literally just the equivalent to a second love interest in a K-drama that gets done dirty for absolutely no reason. Reducing her as a plot device to make shippers mad is so crazy to me, especially because she could have been a perfect beacon of what Noxus is like, especially if they were planning to advertise their Noxus spin-off. Because we really only get a view of what Noxus is like through Mel and Ambessa, so it would have been nice to have like a soldier's perspective. Honestly, there's so much Maddie could have done as a spy, and she just doesn't because she was never intended to be more than drama for K-Bai, which, let's just say, if I had a penny for every interesting plot point that became wasted potential because it was only ever intended to cause drama in Caitlyn and Vi's relationship, I'd have 2 pennies. 2 very disappointed pennies. Anyways, rest in peace, Maddie Nolan. You had like 10 minutes of screen time, but you still spent more facts than Caitlyn did for the entirety of her time in season 2. I can't find the comment, but somebody asked me, who do you think is the most well-written character in season 2? And after thinking about it for a while, I think I'd go ahead and say that it's Jace. Like, I love Echo and Time Bomb, but unfortunately I feel like his writing suffers from how they make the political storyline in season 2 take a swan dive. Victor, he's cool, but I feel like there's so much complexity around his arc that it actually comes off as a little bit jarring at times, and I know plenty of Victor stans have had their fair share of issues with the person who was disabled by Piltover having to be the big bad that everyone comes to fight against. Jinx had a fun little story, but it's entirely inconsistent with what they set up in season 1, and there's so much about the plot around her and her sister being separated that feels so forced and contrived that, again, it's jarring. They completely sidelined Mel this season, I'll be honest. You guys already know well enough how I feel about Caitlyn and Vi, and yeah, that really just leaves Jace. As much as I'm not a fan of it, because the Arcane plotline takes such front and center this season, naturally he's going to benefit from it, especially since they pretty much entirely removed him from the political plotline. I actually like the fact that they kept him out of Act 2. It made the mystery surrounding his character way more interesting, and he doesn't suffer from it because he's already had a full season of being involved, as opposed to someone like Echo, who was already scarce in season 1, which made me want to see more of him in season 2. Now, obviously, I'm not a diehard Jace East End, so I won't be able to notice most of the inconsistencies with his character, but the way his story progresses feels pretty natural. The biggest issue I'd have with him is the speech that they have at the end, where they kind of imply Victor shouldn't be upset about the fact that he was disabled and slowly dying. But other than that one blip, I genuinely went from caring about the Hextech plot the least to it being the main thing I was looking forward to. Granted, that's because they do every other plot line dirty, but you get what you can take. But that's not the only reason I made this video. See, I've been seeing little theories floating around that Jace's arc was actually meant to be Caitlyn's arc in season 2. As in, he was meant to be the one who got all the power, worked with Mbessa, enacted martial law, gassing, etc., everything. Now, if they did the same thing to him as they did to Caitlyn and sanitized the hell out of his character, especially because I know that Jace also seems to be a writer favorite, then it really wouldn't matter to me who it was because the writing still would have been crap. But for the sake of this hypothetical, let's pretend that they didn't chicken out of making him a bad guy and actually committed to his arc. It actually makes a lot of sense, like the fact that Caitlyn's arc in season 1 was building up to being more open-minded towards Zonites, whereas Jace's was slowly becoming more closed-minded because of all of the political duress he was under. And when Caitlyn bursts in the office and says that she's a decorated officer despite the fact that she's not, maybe it would have made more sense for Jace to burst in and be like, I'm a council member, you guys are going to do what I say, I make Hextech. I don't know. Again, I'm not a Jace fanatic, so I don't know if this is entirely in character for him. I haven't done a deep dive, but I do feel like there are certain things that would have clicked more if Jace had Caitlyn's arc. Again, granted, they didn't make the same mistakes they made with Caitlyn's arc. If that was the case, it would have been crap whoever inherited that storyline. But let's say that it didn't. I feel like that's a really interesting concept. But you know, you guys let me know what you think. And if this was the case and Jace took Caitlyn's arc, what arc do you think Caitlyn would have instead? People who like my Arcane political analysis, I bring news to the table. Whether it's good or bad, I don't know, but it definitely is interesting. So I'm on Tumblr, and long story short, I see somebody say that Cross is from Piltover. Now, if you don't remember who Cross is, that's one of the Cambarons, the one who's responsible for the child trafficking and blackmail. We see his goons all over Zon trying to collect children, and we know this because essentially there was these council archives that were released in League alongside Arcane with the Cambarons' profiles in them, and from there we see that he originated from Piltover. And this is so important to me because, as I've already said, even in season 1, the show really lets up the gas on Piltover's oppressiveness post Act 1. As aforementioned, I feel as if the show really tries to push this idea that the only issue with the council is that they're ignorant and neglectful, and not that they've actually culminated an oppressive system towards the people of Zon. So to me, this would have been a game changer, because even if he's not necessarily a council member, the fact that he was in Piltover and left of his own volition because it was easier to take advantage of Zonites, and the fact that you could argue he's the most predatory of all the Cambarons by a mile because he uses child labor, the main thing that people bring up when they want to condemn them, this genuinely would have done wonders for portraying just how deep this view that Zonites are lesser than is ingrained in Piltoverian society. Like, as far as we're aware, there's nothing that pushed this man out of Piltover. He just decided, damn, I really want more money. How about I take advantage of the most vulnerable people in society? And it's made worse by the fact that most of the children in Zon are orphans, most of the time Judah enforcers from Piltover. Oh my god, I'm gonna be mourning the political potential of the show to the day I die, won't I? But yeah, I like internally freaked out when I learned this because my brain for some reason is still so fixated on the failed politics of the League of Legends advertisement. So in conclusion, Jinx should have hit the council again. So a few videos ago, I asked you guys, hey, what character should I talk about next? And I basically shot myself in the foot because you guys proceeded to ask me about every character in the book. However, I've never backed down from a challenge, so here's me talking about every, I think, Arcane character, bar Kate, Jinx, Vi, and Jace, because I've already talked about them. Firstly, Mel, I feel like I really underrated in season 1. Like, looking back on it, she actually had a very interesting arc that I've talked about briefly before, but the main thing that piques my interest with her is the fact that, as opposed to every other council member, maybe except Jace, she doesn't seem to have any personal vendetta or implicit bias against Zon. Her approach to the divide between the two cities seems purely business-based and about how she can build her own capital. Not that this excuses her from participating and upholding the oppressive system of Piltover, but it is a distinction that separates her from the rest of the council, and it's one that's made even more intriguing when you realize that it's probably contributed to by the fact that she comes from Noxus, somewhere that's a lot more explicitly and forcefully oppressive, whereas Piltover is more sly and under the cover with it. So in her mind, perhaps it's more of a, it could be worse situation, and she believes that that type of oppression is inevitable. These are all things that I really wish they would have explored in season 2, but instead they take an approach that kills a lot of birds with one stone. Throwing Mel away and having her get powers solves their need for a Deus Ex Machina to face off against Mbessa, solves the interruption that Mbessa probably would have faced if Mel was in Piltover while she was trying to manipulate Caitlyn, and it also serves as a way to advertise more legal work. It probably would have served me better if I were a League fan, but I'm not, so I was frankly really disinterested the whole time. She does drop some major bars in some of her dialogue though, especially in Act 3, so I'll give her that. My favorite thing about Victor in season 1 is that even though his character arc was heavily ingrained in the magic storyline, it never felt too complex or too pretentious or too unrelatable. It was always very grounded, and I felt like that was reflected in his dialogue. Now compare that to season 2, in which Victor feels like a prime example of a writer doing too much. It feels like there are such big stakes with his character, yet for some reason they're so entirely vague with what is actually happening with him. And again, his dialogue, his conversations, to me it just feels like he's saying so much of nothing in a desperate attempt to coin that feeling that the dialogues and the monologues in season 1 gave us, and it doesn't work. Honestly, I wasn't that attached to Victor in season 1, but even so, watching him in season 2 felt like watching an entirely new person from the get-go. And if that was a point, then it was very poorly communicated, because I think Victor and Jinx are two of the most obvious examples of the writers being changed between season 1 and season 2. And it's not that I personally have an issue with Victor becoming a villain, but the fact that his motivation of, I don't know, not wanting to die from cancer poisoning being demonized feels very odd to me. Like there's a little bit something uncomfortable about him becoming a villain because he was disabled and wanted to live, and specifically became disabled because of Piltover, more specifically the Grey, and his becoming a villain being a key part in the redemption of a character who also uses the Grey against Zahn. Though to be fair, I'm not against the concept of a disabled character getting a taste of being able to quote-unquote cure their disability and then deciding that they need to enact that on everybody else and then completely losing themselves and the plot in the process. I'm not a fan of how they executed it. I said it before, but I'll say it again. I do think Heimerdinger actually has one of the most solid character arcs out of all of the cast. He has an issue, his negligence because of his immortality. He has a conflict, his conflict with Jason Victor and wanting to share Hextech. He has a consequence. He ends up getting kicked off the council, which then leads him to face Echo, a very present-based character, and because of this, he ends up learning the importance of protecting what's in the present as much as protecting what's to come in the future, and sacrifices his life for Echo to return to his universe. Pretty solid character arc, man. I will say he's like a tiny bit flanderized in season 2. Like, I feel like he has no seriousness at all, whereas in season 1, he was so compelling because he's like, yeah, he's silly and goofy, but he actually has a serious side. I literally could not give less of a crap about Heimerdinger, so it sucks that he's the one that has the best arc out of them all. Now, you can't talk about Heimerdinger without talking about the boy savior. In a show that's identity is built on mental issues, being a bad person, and trauma responses, Echo being a pretty put together, mentally solid character doesn't make him boring in a way that you might worry it would. He's a perfect testament to the fact that a character doesn't have to have 95 different facets to them to be interesting. His sparsity in season 1 makes sense and works because it gives you the satisfaction of knowing that all of these characters are being utilized to their full extent, to the point where even someone as inconsequential as Echo in Act 1 is gonna reappear. But it also helps with the world building of the Undercity and doesn't make it feel like it's just Vi and Jinx that we can connect through. And there's so much about the Firelights that once Silco died, I really wanted to see more of, especially when they dropped that line about the base getting too full up. I really wanted to see how they were going to tackle that, because that is a very rough situation to be in. What happens when it gets full up? But him more than anyone shouldn't have just had a story revolving around his relationship with Jinx, especially with Silco gone. There was so much that the Firelights could have stepped up to bat and did, but the writers just didn't do it. In fact, there's one character I would have killed to see him interact with before he went to the AU, and that's Savika. Very quick, I love Savika. I actually think she's one of the characters that gets kind of better in season 2. Like, she definitely got promoted from semi-background character to actual side character or even Duragonist, and I love that. I would have loved to get some of her backstory though, and to know why she is the way she is, or even why she betrayed Vander, but her story is sort of restrained to whatever Jinx is doing. Still, her, Jinx, Isha, favorite parts of the season to me. However, having Echo and Savika interact probably would have done wonders for not only both their characters, but the story at large, and that's because of the fact that Savika and Echo are the most loyal characters in the show, but they're on entirely two opposite sides of the spectrum. Echo is loyal to his community, to his people, to the point where he feels like he sort of gave up on Zahn. Savika is loyal to the cause, to Zahn, to the point where she no longer cares if people get hurt in the process. And the thing is, neither of these approaches in isolation would have been the true way to free Zahn, in my opinion. So forcing Savika's cutthroatness and Echo's community mind to work together would have been genius, and having them reluctantly teaming up against Piltover and the Council and the Enforcers, something that we've been told about all throughout season 1, as opposed to Noxus, something we barely know anything about, it just would have been so much more satisfying to me. I really don't have much to say about Vander and Silco other than the fact that I wish they would have acknowledged the harm that Vander's pacifism brought to Zahn, instead of actually being like, oh, well, you know, he was right all along. Holy crap, I should be a rapper. And anyways, with Silco, it's not that I have an issue with him being a villain, it's more so the fact that it feels like it's done so violently in order to take the responsibility and blame off of Piltover. It really does feel like any person from Zahn is characterized as good by strongly opposing Silco and being willing to compromise with Piltover. Like, don't mistake me, he's a very well-written and nuanced character. I just wish there was another group who was equally revolutionary but less harmful to make it feel as if they weren't demonizing violent resistance. But then again, they probably were, so I guess that's why. Also, quick question, when the hell does Vander attack Silco? From what I gauge from season 2, Silco starts a riot that gets Felicia killed, Vander gets mad, and then tries to kill Silco. But that doesn't really align with season 1, because I'm pretty sure the riot afterwards is meant to be the moment where he realizes he wants to be a pacifist and he puts down the gauntlets. So what, did he put down the gauntlets, take the kids home, pick them back up, and beat the shit out of Silco? Like, I don't get it. Also, in season 1, he has a beard after the riot, but in season 2, he doesn't have a beard when he's attacking Silco. Questions, and I need answers, man. And last but most definitely not least, Ambessa, just an incredibly well-written character. She's a villain, but she's not constantly being excused by the narrative, so she's actually fun to engage with, unlike someone else. Her strained relationship with Mel actually feels like something straight out of season 1, and genuinely, that's the biggest compliment I can give this character. So I will say, I wish we saw the fox side of her more as opposed to the wolf. I just feel it's very underutilized. We really don't see that much manipulation from her at all, other than the last minute plot twist that was kind of obvious, and her basically telling Caitlyn, you're better than me, I wouldn't let that slide. Like, the dialogue is engaging, but I want more. And I think, honestly though, Act 1 had the best idea by having her play both Piltover and Zahn, and that's something that they definitely should have continued into Act 2, especially like having her intentionally sabotaging Caitlyn's attempts to find Jinx, because the longer it takes for her to find Jinx, the longer it takes for Ambessa to be able to usurp Hextech. So overall, wonderfully written character, just very underutilized. I'm trying to save most of my Vi commentary for a video that I'm putting out. However, there is one thing I want to talk about, and it's a point that I made in a video a while ago, but I didn't exactly have the words to explain why and how I felt. TLDR, I made a video ages ago about how I thought the scene where Vi approaches Jinx in the cell was very weird and out of character, but I couldn't exactly place my finger on what was so weird about it. Like obviously it felt mischaracterizing, but why? And I think I get it now. It has everything to do with how the sisters are separated in season 2 compared to season 1. In season 1, yes, there are external factors that play a part in why Jinx and Vi can't be together, but it's also fundamentally their relationship. It's how they've grown up, it's their trauma, it's their struggles. So you could remove all of that external bullcrap and they would still struggle to actually form a healthy and happy relationship at the time. They probably wouldn't be able to for the mental state that both of them were in. Compare that to season 2, where Jinx and Vi are actually very close to reaching an understanding with one another time and time again, which is fine, but then the show has to pull out random stuff out of its back pocket to justify having them being separated. In Act 1, it's that big gust of wind, and you know what? It's the first time they're doing this, so whatever. In Act 2, it's Warwick being injected with this weird medicine that makes him vomit lava. And in Act 3, it's extreme mischaracterization on the end of Vi. I'm sorry, I just can't get behind the character they built Vi to be. Seeing her sister in a jail cell, which she should have trauma from, seeing her in a jail cell that stinks of rotten flesh, seeing her looking so disheveled, not eating, etc. And the first words that come out of her mouth are basically, do you want to join the war? Mind you, Vi literally wakes up from a flashback of Isha killing herself. Like, I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say I don't think any of the characters would react like that if it was someone they cared about, least of all Vi. It just feels so forced, and another way to have these two have another misunderstanding that we literally should not be having at the penultimate episode. And again, thematically, it doesn't even change anything, because it's not as if Vi chooses to let Jinx go. Vi doesn't have the choice. She gets locked in jail. So it's not even about her being selfish. It's just another stupid miscommunication trope. It's why I also hate the whole, oh, the sisters can never be happy in any universe thing. It's like the Jinx thing that I mentioned in my video, where in season 1, Jinx being the Jinx was like a environmental thing, and it was a commentary on how we're a product of nature and nurture, and the dangers of self-fulfilling prophecies. And in season 2, it just became a curse. Similarly, in season 1, the sisters being separated by external forces didn't feel like them getting separated for the sake of it. It was a reflection of how internally dysfunctional their relationship is. And when they have nothing else to interfere, they still can't work it out at the tea party. In season 2, apparently the cosmic forces are working to keep these two apart against all odds for no known reason. It just feels very watered down and cheap in comparison. But yeah, that's my updated take on that video and why it feels so odd to me. If there's one thing I am, it's fair, and I've given Kate Vi a lot of smoke for its bad writing in season 2. Now I need to give Time Bomb the same smoke. For me, the issues with Time Bomb are the same issues that I kind of have with season 1 Kate Vi, where the dynamic on screen is cute, it's a good ship, I like it, but when you start to think about it, more and more it doesn't make sense. For example, how Vi shouldn't be falling in love with Caitlyn this fast, with all the trauma she should have from being abused by enforcers for 7 years in jail. And for Time Bomb, the biggest elephant in the room is that Jinx and Echo had been at war for God knows how long, and Jinx has been killing his friends. Why was this something that was not addressed on screen? Now, Jinx does have the benefit of being a very popular character, so she gets all the after season content, the art book, Jinx fixes everything, the music video, but that's still not enough. I can't give you your props for confirming something after the fact when it should have been in the show. It is also very crazy how it's framed that Echo is the one who needs to change his view on Jinx, and how Jinx isn't the one who needs to change her view when she was the one causing the majority of the damage. Don't get me wrong, you can do a thing where they both go through having their views changed on one another, but it's just crazy that they only focus it on Echo, like Echo is the one who has to reach out, when in reality, with everything she's done, it should be Jinx. I love my girl Jinx, but she really needed some introspection, and I think through Time Bomb this could have been perfect, because you could have had her extend in Olive Branch, is that the saying, to the Firelights. You could have seen how Isha's death changed her to want to fight for the same thing that the Firelights are fighting for, or whatever, something like that. And whilst Jinx is learning this new purpose, when Echo comes back, he confirms, yeah, you are still Powder, you can still change. They can have that build something new talk. It also come back very nicely to the beginning of her arc in Act 1, where she wants to start fixing things instead of breaking them. I just never really saw the need to make Jinx briefly suicidal just to turn around and be like, oh, she's okay again, other than giving Echo something to save. I will say one thing though, I'm glad they didn't put them in a canon relationship. Like, I'm glad all it is that they canonically have feelings for each other, in the same way that I'm glad they didn't kiss in the MV. That's just too much too quickly. I don't want these guys to be forced. At least now they still have all the potential in the world for how this could go. Maybe it'll happen in a spin-off, a movie, a comic book, I don't care, but at least now it doesn't feel too rushed. I mean, it is rushed, everything in season 2 is rushed, but it's not accelerating at the speed of light for no reason. They have feelings for each other, we know that, that's all we need to know. But back to my original point, I just wish there was overall more agency from Jinx. Anyway, put your hottest Arcane take down in the comments because I want to see some. Mine is that Caitlyn is a good parallel to Silco, and read Base Violence Necessary by Honeydew on AO3. Bye! This is actually a very funny comment because there's literally like a timeline of events for why I think this particular fanbase of this particular character became such big crash outs. And don't get me wrong, you get obsessive fans in every genre. It's not a new thing, it's fandom. But watching how the fanbase became like this in real time was very interesting, so let me share it with you guys. So we have to go all the way back to the better times before season 2 was even released and look at the season 1 fanbase. I wasn't exactly active in it, but even I could tell that there was a lot of unfair and disproportionate hatred to Caitlyn, and it was mainly fans of Jinx who didn't like the fact that she was getting in between Vi and Jinx reconciling. But that's not really fair. Like, I don't like like to say people's hatred is invalid, but you can't really blame Caitlyn for that. There are also other people who just never liked the whole cop thing, and hey, that's also valid too. I don't want to say people's hate or like is invalid. But the point is, she received a lot of disproportionate hate. So keep that in mind. Fast forward a few months before season 2 comes out and it gets leaked. Specifically episodes 1 to 6. And now this is where I start noticing the downfall. Immediately, the people who watch the leaks are like, oh my god, Caitlyn is gone too far. I can't defend her anymore. Like, this is too much. She's gone off the deep end, da-da-da. Now knowing what we know about season 2, this isn't an unreasonable reaction at all, especially without the context of episodes 7 to 9, though in all fairness, they don't help that much. Now put yourself in the Caitlyn fans' shoes. Your favorite character has received such an unnecessary and disproportionate amount of hate for such a long time, and now people are basically saying that that hate is going to be justified. That would be very jarring. Now what the interesting thing was, as if they owed this fictional character some loyalty, immediately these people started pledging their allegiance, like, oh, no matter what she does, I'm always going to defend her, da-da-da. And like, back then, I thought it was just all in lighthearted fun, but looking at it now, no, they really meant that, which is so peculiar to me, because in turn, it kind of makes all the post-season 2 arguments feel more like coping on behalf of the Caitlyn fans. Like, come on, when you're arguing that a show with blatant classism is one of the main themes isn't political, you're definitely coping. And so now everything from the nonsense arguments that borderline contradict the information shown in the show to the weird comfortability of parroting alt-right rhetoric in defense of a fictional character. It all slightly makes more sense when you're looking at it from the angle of people who don't want to admit that their favorite character was done dirty because they think that it makes the people who originally hated on her right, which no, it doesn't. There is also a secret second option to explain the craziness, and it's Twitter, but that feels like a little bit of a cop-out. Oh yeah, about this. So I don't think in League, Caitlyn was intended to be Asian before Arcane came out. I think she was always like depicted as a white British woman or a white French woman, but now in Arcane, she's Asian. And I don't care about that, by the way. I don't care about race swapping as long as you're not turning a person of color white. But I do find it interesting, and I mentioned that this tweet pointed it out ages ago. The fact that not only are all of the main characters from Piltover people of color, but two of them, Caitlyn and Jace, had their races changed from the source material to make them people of color, whereas all of the characters from Zon are white, minus Echo and Savika, who are side characters. And the reason it's intriguing is because obviously racial oppression doesn't exist in Arcane, but it doesn't mean that that's suddenly removed when we're watching it as viewers. And so I wonder if it was done with the intention of creating this cognitive dissonance where it's harder for us to connect these characters' oppressive actions to the character themselves, obviously because we don't usually associate people of color with being in a position to oppress people, at least not in the West. And every single character in Piltover that is a person of color has held power over Piltover and Zon at some point or another. And I feel like there are many explanations for why they did this, but a part of me wonders, especially looking at season 2 now, if they did that to sanitize Piltover's oppression almost. I've talked about this a while ago, but even as much as I love season 1, looking back, you can definitely see that there's a difference in how they present the Council's oppression in comparison to Soko's. For the Council, it's like their biggest issue is arrogance and ignorance, but for Zon, you know, Soko is actively predatory and abusing them. He's a drug lord. There's definitely an imbalance in how they present these two types of oppression, and so part of me wonders, was having so many of the people of color be in Piltover that added cherry on top in order to make it so we have that dissonance? It just makes me wonder how Arcane would have been received had everyone in Piltover been white and had everyone in Zon been black, regardless of whether or not there was actually any racial oppression in the show. Although, to be fair, during the Paint the Town Blue montage, we also have a bunch of new black Zon characters pop up, and these are characters who are like explicitly being brutalized by police, so maybe they just did it for aesthetics. I don't know. What do you guys think? I personally was never against the idea of Vi becoming an enforcer. I just think that the way they went about it in season 2 was very, very rushed. But there are plenty of reasons that the show doesn't decide to get into as to why Vi would become an enforcer and try and kill Jinx. But rewatching season 1, there's another really interesting one that I feel like isn't talked about that much. Vi's a good person, right? Or that's at least a core part of her identity, having a good heart. And when she comes out of prison, it seems like she attaches her having a good heart to her ability to bring Powder back. Like, obviously she wants to be reunited with her sister, she misses her, she loves her, but there's also a part of it where it's like, I can do this, I can prove that I'm still the same. Because obviously change, as we see throughout the series, is a really big thing for Vi. It's not something that she handles well. So ultimately, when Jinx chooses to be Jinx instead of staying Powder, and by the way, obviously like a bunch of crazy stuff happens at night. I'm not saying this is the only thing, but I'm saying it's a factor. That in Vi's mind feels like a betrayal. That was, in her thoughts, the only way she could prove that she was a good person. And she was so assured about it to everyone she spoke to Echo, to Savika. I'm gonna bring her back. I'm her sister. I have to do it. And so Jinx doing that in her mind is probably like Jinx's way of saying you, when it's not necessarily that. And I feel like it's probably one of the best explanations for why Vi switched on a dime so quickly, especially when we're looking at it from the angle of, in season 1, Vi says herself Jinx was her lifeline. And so to go from that to, from you're not my sister, I'm gonna kill you in a few days, I just can't imagine that the council would provoke that type of reaction from her. And I also can't imagine that Vi, someone who constantly allows people to treat her poorly because she has low self-esteem, would genuinely be that morally outraged by what Jinx has done. I'm not saying it wouldn't make sense if she was, but for her character, I don't think it's just that at the very least. least. I think there's something more at play here than just thinking that Jinx is a bad person. I mean, you even hear it in how she speaks. You're not my sister, you killed her. She's trying to convince herself that it wasn't a failing on her part, which it wasn't, but she's trying to convince herself by saying that you've never been my sister's been dead the whole time, so I didn't fail in bringing Powder back because Powder was dead. TLDR, it definitely feels like there's a personal aspect in this where she feels like Powder betrayed her personally, not even by the stuff she done, but purely by choosing to be Jinx instead of Powder. Again, one factor out of many, but it's a really interesting point that says a lot for Vi's character, and I wish they would have gone into it more.
In light of Amanda Overton giving us all the misfortune of hearing her takes on Vi once again, I feel like I want to break down why Arcane would be classed as propaganda, because I see a lot of people confused about it, and so I'm gonna give my explanation for why it's propaganda, I guess in my eyes, because it's kind of subjective, I don't know. But before I get into that, I'm gonna need your guys' attention for a little bit. If you're unaware, Sudan has been going through one of the largest humanitarian crises across the whole world right now. To put it simply, it is being genocided by the RSF, and despite trying to take it to the International Court of Justice, the RSF is being protected by the UAE. People in Sudan are being slaughtered every day because of gold. The United States have already acknowledged that the Sudanese people are going through a genocide, yet nobody helps them. We all know about the Palestinian genocide. I please ask you to show the same sympathy to the Sudanese people, and if you can, donate to the sites that I'm about to show you, or if you can, please share this video in hopes that somebody who can will. And as always, keep the Sudanese people in your heart. With that being said, let's get on to Arcane and propaganda. See, the biggest point of confusion or contention for a lot of people who think Arcane isn't propaganda is that, well, the show blatantly paints the enforcers as bad people. Whilst this is true, this doesn't exempt it from being propaganda, because propaganda isn't just, oh, all cops are good, but rather it is any type of media that convinces you that all cops are not under a bastardized system. This includes the "it's just a few bad apples" rhetoric that Arcane pushes even from season 1. And here's the thing, you might think that's a bit of an extreme standard to hold a fictional show to, but let's be honest here. Arcane's class issues and its police system is one of the most grounded in reality topics in the entire show. There is barely anything that separates how the enforcers operate to how many police systems across the world operate. And so reflecting that type of anti-ACAB messaging in the show translates basically one-on-one to the show's messaging on police in real life. And whilst there's definitely some propaganda that is just straight up all cops are good, most mature propaganda will include some form of police critique, because as I said, the end goal is to make you have a positive perception of police, and it's easier to do that if you acknowledge the flaws, because people will be more open to hearing your messaging if you do that. I mean, take season 1 for example. But here's the thing, as long as you acknowledge something is propaganda, it can still be enjoyable. Again, take season 1 as an example. But season 2 is especially egregious, essentially for what Amanda Overton said summed up. We're sort of meant to just get over the fact that the police suck. I've already spoken loads about why Arcane season 2 sucks from a political lens, but to sum it up, too much police brutality, not enough reform for us to even have an inkling of trust that this is a satisfying end for our characters, or even a respectful one. And so when Amanda Overton comes online and says something like this, it adds salt to the wound, because not only is it just weird to talk about your police system that is very heavily ingrained in real life like this, it's annoying because this is actually the mindset they went into season 2 with. Vi hating enforcers after being abused by them all her life was something she just had to get past because it's just a silly little phase. You can tell that's how they treated her character. Anyways, I don't want to turn this into another rant about how poorly they did Vi. All I'll say is propaganda is a spectrum, and it's not always going to be mindlessly praising cops. Most modern day propaganda will actually critique cops, because the whole point of propaganda in general is to be implicit enough so you don't notice it, but explicit enough so it can imprint on your biases and perceptions. The sooner you learn that, the better you'll be at calling it out when you see it. I know you guys are going to be mad that I'm using what remains of my voice to make my 100,000 Kate by rant video instead of making that alien stage analysis on the new comic that came out, but when inspiration calls, I gotta follow it. God forbid a girl get hyperfixated on something that's not entirely positive. Analysis is fun, leave me alone. Anyways, alien stage video coming out soon, I promise. But this is so funny. See, in that video I made about Caitlyn being a hypocrite, somebody as usual was arguing with me about it, but in doing so, they actually ended up convincing me that the scene was worse than what I initially thought, and I thought it was pretty bad. I don't know if it was reverse psychology or a guerrilla war tactic or whatever, but Kate stands, you need to fire this one. They weren't giving the PR that needed to be gave. Anyways, I already talked about how on a baseline the scene is messed up because there is no real indication that this is military/private area, and so Caitlyn basically pounces on a civilian for walking in their own city outside a very populated haven, mind you. Imagine you're at a superstore on Black Friday and you try to leave and you get beat on by a random police officer because apparently, unbeknownst to you, it's a military area. Like, that's messed up. Though to be expected, Mbessa and Caitlyn are enacting an occupational apartheid, so. But unfortunately, it doesn't just end there. No, it actually gets 10 times worse. See, Caitlyn's guard post is on high ground because Caitlyn is a sniper and, you know, common sense, rifles are typically long distance weapons. This would allow her to 1, avoid engaging in unnecessary risk, and 2, it would allow her to more effectively act as a deterrent for any possible civilians who happen to just be passing by. You know, as I mentioned, they are right beside a very populated area. It's no surprise that civilians might be walking about, like Vi was. With that information in mind, you'd assume the scene would play out with Caitlyn giving a warning shot to anybody who is passing by the area and telling them to redirect, considering there is nothing else to warn them. This solution keeps both parties safe, considering the very real possibilities of it being a person that could easily overpower Caitlyn, or somebody who is just a random innocent civilian walking around. But for some completely unfathomable reason, the show has Caitlyn turn her long-range weapon into a short-range weapon and makes her use it as a battering ram in this completely unnecessary close physical combat. This is such a weird risk to have her take, especially considering the fact that there is a known monster from Zon that has been let loose, and for all she knows, there could be more following up. And also, as the other person I was arguing with pointed out, they could have concealed weapons. What's the point of painting a picture of this character as someone who is staunchly anti-police brutality and then having her engage in an entirely unnecessary unnecessary instance of police brutality T-minus 5 minutes before her supposedly very realistic turnaround. Like, I'm supposed to believe that the person who is so ecstatic to beat on a random civilian that they left the high ground that was keeping them safe is supposed to have a change of heart and switch sides in the next scene? No, not really. Don't get me wrong, I know why they did this. They wanted to show off how strong Caitlyn had gotten on the character who is not only a victim of abuse but has already been hit by this character whilst they were in a relationship before. But if there's anything that Kate by Twitter and Amanda Overton has taught me is that butches can't be abused, so I guess we don't have to worry about that. Depressingly realistic jokes aside, it's just so funny when a poorly thought out concept clearly has horrible implications that the writers didn't intend. Like, congratulations, you wanted to use a victim of abuse to show that your character is now strong. Now you made it look like your character is actually in love with beating on random civilians. You played yourself. And as I already said, I never disagreed with the idea that actions speak louder than words. I think words are important. However, when it comes to your actions contradicting every single thing that comes out of your mouth, well, that's when you start to accidentally write yourself into a corner. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I promise once I get over this cold Alien Stage comic analysis coming out soon, I have a lot to say. And if you're a K-Pie stan and you're about to, or in the process of, or have already typed out and posted your comment telling me to focus on real world issues, I'm gonna assume that you're genuinely interested in finding resources and not that you're that horrible of a person that you weaponize real conflicts in order to get someone to stop talking about a fictional character in a way you don't like. And if that's the case, I direct you to the previous videos in this playlist, in which I provide information and resources about various conflicts around the world. Bye bye!
Little story time because I just randomly remembered this. Ages ago when Arcane Season 2 had first finished, I remember posting a question to the Arcane subreddit way before I knew that if you said even anything remotely negative about the show, you'd be hung on a stake. And I asked, why didn't Vi kill Ambessa in this moment? The scene I'm talking about is when she breaks out of the cuffs and picks up the gun. Like, why didn't she blend Ambessa right there and then? And I'm gonna be honest, I felt like I kind of had my answer when I posted it. In my mind, it was definitely a bit of plot got a plot, you know, giving Ambessa plot armor so she could still stand as the final villain. But I did genuinely want to see other people's perspectives on it. And so I basically got a whole lot of resounding Vi's a protector, not a killer comments. So it wouldn't make sense for her to just blatantly murder someone who's defenseless, even if they pose a danger to everyone she cares about. And at the time I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting perspective, and never thought about it again. Until now. And I just realized what a bunch of bullcrap that is. Obviously Vi isn't like Jinx and she's not a crazy mass murderer, but there are plenty of times in the show where Vi justifies sacrifice in order for a greater goal. We see it when she tells Jace they have to continue despite the fact that they have just accidentally killed a child. We see it when she joins the Enforcers and gasses her home city in order to find Jinx. And this is not slander, this is just me stating facts. Vi knows when suffering and killing is necessary, even though I don't think the gassing was necessary. Point is, I think any character in that position who would have had the stakes that Vi had would have blamed Ambessa, especially Vi. So to act like her character is some sort of pacifist is crazy to me. I think they just kind of wrote themselves into a hole and needed Ambessa to still survive while giving Vi at least one moment to look cool. And honestly, had the season been written better or well written at all, I probably would have been fine looking past this. Like, I do recognize it is a little bit of a nitpick. You know, shows are all about give and take. You give me a good story, you can take a little bit of grace from when you mess up. Unfortunately, we were not given a good story, so they're not taking any grace. But yeah, that was just a random memory that popped up in my head, and I was just really thinking like, damn, they really gaslit me again. Anyway, speaking of them, if you're genuinely getting mad that I'm making an AU of a show that I criticize, you are so pathetic. Please make like Rapunzel and touch some grass. Anyways, chapter 32 is up, so go read it, and I will see you guys again.
How is it I can be minding my business, just having a good day, and someone is gonna pop up on my Tumblr feed and say, hey, do you guys ever think about how Caitlyn and Maddie technically dated for a much longer time than Caitlyn and Vi knew each other point blank period? Oh my god, why would you say that? Why would you make it worse? We already knew the writers did not care about these two, except for Amanda Overton, but she doesn't count because she only cares about Caitlyn. Why would you say that? No, because it actually had me sitting there and doing the math. I'm pretty sure everything from when Caitlyn and Vi first meet, season 1, act 2, to when Caitlyn and Vi break up, season 2, act 1, happens within the span of like a week at most, maybe 2 weeks. And then there's a time skip between act 1 and act 2, which is like half a year, I think. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Caitlyn went home and banged Maddie right away, right after smashing Vi in her gut. Unless there's some like crazy year-long time skip between Jinx dying in the final scene of the show. I'm pretty sure Vi and Caitlyn have like known each other for like 2 or 3 months right now, not even counting when they started dating. Like, they have known each other for this amount of time, and Caitlyn and Maddie have dated for like half a year. Oh my god, it just gets worse and worse. Oh my god, I don't know how you season 2 K-Pie stans do it. I would literally go crazy if they butchered something I cared about this deeply. I mean, I did care about K-Pie, but like, not enough to care about it in season 2. I don't know, I would go insane. I'm surprised one of y'all has not fought one of the main writers on the show. Probably Christian Link, if we're being honest. Like, one of y'all is gonna need to put him up to a boxing match. You guys can't keep letting him get away with this. Like, I personally wouldn't take that. I mean, I've accepted that every ship in season 2 is really not good, but oh, there's a different type of disrespect with how they handle K-Pie. I'm genuinely surprised. I mean, no, y'all, y'all did crash out. That's why y'all was sending slurs and stuff in people's DMs. Okay. I hate this trope, and do you unfortunately know who is a perfect example of it? Look at the background video. TLDR, the trope that the commenter is describing is essentially where media will take a character and give them a revolutionary ideology, but then we'll also have them act in such a cartoonishly evil way, and then we'll fundamentally link their behavior to their ideology, in the process demonizing that ideology. It's basically a much more detrimental "that one friend who's too woke" meme. And before you hold me at gunpoint, Silco did not always fall into this trope. No, it's more so that season 2 is so poorly written that it ends up screwing over characters who weren't even in the season. When season 1 is presented to us, it seems like Silco is going to fit very squarely into this trope, right? A revolutionary character who's not very sympathetic at all. That is until we get to the end of Act 1, and we learn more about Silco's motivations, and we also get that moment of subversion where he doesn't kill Powder and actually adopts her. From then on, Silco becomes an extremely, if not the most nuanced character in the show. However, that nuance is more performed in his relationship with Jinx than his approach to revolution. If anything, his portrayal as a revolutionary is even more demonized than it was in Act 1. However, he still doesn't fall into this trope. And the reason that is because Silco is not the only revolutionary in the show. We also have the Firelights, another revolutionary group who want to fight against Piltover, but also care about the people within Zaun. You could easily describe them as the most morale group in the show. And so just by nature of the Firelights existing as another revolutionary group, Silco's character reads much less as a demonization of people who want to fight against their oppressors and rather a commentary on how that movement can become corrupted by oppression and capitalism. And you might be thinking, Digi, you just explained how he's not the thing you don't like. What are you rambling about now? And to that I say, hold on, little grasshopper. You should know whenever I start talking about season 2, things are immediately gonna go downhill. And unfortunately, go downhill they do. I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a Silco fan, but man, is it horrible how him dying in season 1 cannot protect him from the horrible writing of season 2. And I'm not talking about the horrible retcon of his backstory or even his sad excuse for his speech when Jinx hallucinates him that tries so hard to be fake deep and mirror the heights of his season 1 monologues and just fails. I guess that's something that Silco and Victor's season 2 counterparts have in common. Okay, sorry, slander aside, the true nail in the coffin for Silco's character was the writers choosing to do nothing with the Firelights in season 2. You see, after Silco died, the natural course should have been the Firelights stepping up and trying to take more control of Zaun whilst also fighting against Piltover. But the writers don't want to do that because they don't actually want any of the characters to fight against Piltover. And unlike Silco, they can't really get away with demonizing the Firelight. And so the show literally throws the main leader of the Firelights, Echo, into another dimension and only has him return in Act 3 just for his character to entirely revolve around Jinx and for him to basically forget about his people and his original mission. Meanwhile, the rest of the Firelights literally only exist to be Jinx's backup dancers and her stamp of approval for redemption despite her not actually doing anything to deserve one because they're the good revolutionaries. And as a result of the show going to such lengths to avoid showing the Firelights taking any actual revolutionary actions, it retroactively leaves Silco as the only actual revolutionary character on the show, which begins to make the writers' views on revolutionaries very clear. Oh god, especially Christian Links. That man hates Silco. I'm pretty sure he calls him a slur every time he talks about him. All this to say, damn, truly none of the characters are safe from the train wreck that was season 2. Okay, so a lot of people seem to be confused about that last point. People have asked me to elaborate, people have thought it was a reach, and you know what? I put it as 100% hot take for a reason. I understood it was going to be divisive, so let me clarify for a little bit. It's pretty clear that Arcane season 2 has explicit political content. Now, despite this content not being used for anything other than window dressing for character arcs that don't actually go anywhere, it's still there. Chemical warfare, martial law, apartheid state, police brutality, and not explicitly political, but still relevant to the point, DV. And in the show, these topics are inherently linked to Vi and Caitlyn, two canonical lesbians. The long and short of it is in a means to protect a rare instance of lesbian representation. A lot of queer people have found themselves quite carelessly using rhetoric that, in the same breath, defends the topics that I mentioned prior. A few examples I can think of off the top of my head: when Caitlyn fans were spamming my comments for 40 days and 40 nights, essentially telling me that butches can't be abused. Ironically enough, an insanely lesbophobic statement to make, disguised as a defense of a lesbian couple. This was, of course, in vehement defense of the writing decision to have Caitlyn hit Vi with a weapon and then decide to not have them mention it in the entire show again ever. We also have the weirdly Zionist defenses. I kid you not, I've seen the words verbatim, Piltover has the right to defend itself, about 50 times now, leading me to frequently lament whether or not Kate Vi Twitter is a social experiment at this point. Oh, and obviously we can't forget the ever-famous police brutality is justified if it's against criminals, a belief that's held dear by both Caitlyn fans and the Triple K alike. And of course, I'm sure some of you guys still think I'm reaching. I mean, how could I even begin to compare someone saying that about a fictional show to someone defending it in real life? Well, unfortunately, that's exactly how pipelines work. You use this rhetoric that is dangerous in real life and apply it to a fictional scenario. You surround yourself around people who are doing the same thing. Eventually, it's going to bleed into your day-to-day. And sooner rather than later, that will become how you view those circumstances in real life. That's kind of the entire point of how propaganda works. And honestly, the fact that there's a laundry list longer than the flaws of season 2 of Black and Brown creators that Kate Vi fans have harassed for speaking up about how the police brutality made them feel uncomfortable in season 2 and ruined Kate Vi's dynamic for them proves my point. And whilst typically white queers forgetting that intersectionality exists is not a newsworthy event at all, it really does suck how often it happens. But yeah, that's my belief as to why Arcane season 2 is going to be a lot of young queer people's introduction to the alt-right pipeline. I meant to make this video right the next day, but then all of a sudden life happened and I couldn't find a single quiet moment. But we're here now, and yes, absolutely, there is something fucking weird going on with non-black time bomb stands. I'm gonna be very honest. So basically, there's this fan art going around on Twitter that's inspired by this AO3 fanfic, and the amount of weird, problematic stuff both between this fanfiction and this fan art that manages to be crossed off, just, it shouldn't baffle me, but it does. So first off, we have the fan art, right? Here are Jinx and Echo portrayed in a very stereotypically vaguely Middle Eastern design, very Orientalist, kind of like the Aladdin of fan designs, am I right? And very obviously this is an issue because it reinforces this idea that all areas in the Middle East are one and the same and that all of these cultures are interchangeable with one another. And this also stems from how desirable people will find these cultures based on the stereotypes they have of them. I mean, think about it. When something comes from East Asian culture, people will immediately know the region, the country, the city, hell, they'll know the street and house number of the person who made it. But when it comes to, say, African cultures, a whole ass continent, or a major part of Asia, the Middle East, people don't really care about differentiating because to them, they're all the same. Not because they genuinely believe that our cultures are so similar to one another that there's no point in distinguishing them, but rather because they don't see anything there to fetishize, and so they just decide that we're not worth our individuality. But like I kind of mentioned with the Aladdin reference, unfortunately this kind of Orientalism is very popular, very mainstream in Western media, so I could understand how someone might have never known or was introduced to the fact that this is indeed problematic problematic. And I feel like if people had told them, hey, this is very Orientalist, this is very weird, and they had taken that on board, taken accountability, and done some research, everybody would have been able to leave this in the past. With that being said, what do you guys think they did? You think they took accountability and we all moved on? Obviously not. Would not be making this video if they had. And whilst people on the internet not being able to admit that they're wrong is pretty par for the course, the way this person goes about it is quite literally hilarious. See, apparently their logic is that the only reason people are angry at them is because, let me just check my notes here, apparently we are all psychopaths who have this want to kill people, but of course that's illegal. And so instead, we settle for the next best thing, correcting someone on their racism on Twitter. Listen, I know some people on Twitter can be crazy. Feel like you could have 100% come up with a better excuse for why you don't want to say sorry. Just straight up saying, I don't give a fuck about Arab people, I hate y'all, and I hope you all die, probably would have been a more appropriate response than this bullcrap. So honestly, we shouldn't be too surprised that this is the artist's response to them being accused of racism, given how, one, they clearly have an allergy to drawing Echo's skin tone the way that it is in the show, and consistently have to make him 10 times lighter than he actually is, and two, well, the origin of what the fan art came from in the first place. Yeah, unfortunately, it only gets worse from here. From what I can gather, the fanfiction is similarly Orientalist, but in a much worse way because it reeks of, oh, Arab men are aggressive and lustful and horrible and barbaric, and just from that description alone, I'm sure you can tell where the anti-blackness starts to pour in. Because yes, they indeed take Echo, the character who is literally characterized by his compassion, by his community mind, by his morality, and turn him into a barbaric tyrant who forces himself sexually upon both women and girls, and then sacrifices them after because he has an insatiable need for both blood and lust. Do you guys really comprehend how much hatred you have to black people in order to make something like this? To take such a rare instance of representation for black men and turn it into something like this, I fear you might actually be a part of the clan. And yes, this is one of those instances where mischaracterization isn't just a slightly offset headcanon, but rather someone going out of their way to turn a character into the literal antithesis of themselves, all for the sake of portraying them in a manner that fits with their stereotypes. Now, I'm not going to say all Time Bomb fan media has this issue, especially not to this extent, but I have noticed that a lot of Time Bomb fan media seems incapable of interacting with the ship and its dynamics on the premise of the characters' personalities, and seems to rely on preconceived notions of what roles they should be based on either their gender or their race. See, there's two ways Time Bomb is usually depicted. It's either girl boss Jinx, male wife Echo, or submissive Jinx and dominant Echo, and truly neither of these seems like depictions that could have possibly been truly gathered from the show, but rather from people who want to ship something but are too ingrained in their biases to actually understand something that goes against them. Most notably on Echo, people can't seem to comprehend that he is a kind-hearted and sweet character because he is also very bold, a leader, and someone who stands his ground, which aren't even contradictory traits in the first place, but I guess people's brains just seem to turn off when it comes to black characters and they refuse to engage with them critically, and that usually results in the side of the Time Bomb fandom that likes to erase his softness from his character. As for the girl boss male wife dynamic, I think that's just a trend in fandom nowadays where people will headcanon straight ships like that, which whatever, but I also think a part of it stems from the fact that people find strength and defiance uncomfortable on black men, and so they water him down in order to make it comfortable to ship him with Jinx, which is insane to me because at least in the Arcane fandom, the ship literally sailed from Echo putting his paws on Jinx, as he should have at the time, by the way. But it just makes it so funnier to see people remove that part of his character because it makes him uncomfortable. Like, remember your roots, okay? In conclusion, I don't know why a lot of you guys ship Time Bomb, since clearly quite a few of you guys don't actually like or care about their dynamic at all. Although I guess I can't entirely blame you guys for it. Instead of going with the inherently superior interpretation of childhood enemies to lovers, where they are the only two in the world who can understand one another, and yet they are the only two who can go toe to toe, and the turmoil that comes from being inextricably connected to someone that you know you need to go against for the greater good, they instead went for, let's strip Echo of all of his personality traits and make his entire character arc revolve around Jinx. I mean, okay, whatever floats your boat, I guess. But back to my point, yeah, I don't think a lot of people understand what Time Bomb actually is. And that'd be one thing if it weren't for the fact that I feel like this lack of understanding is coming from the fact that there is a black character in the ship and people are just instinctually trying to put him into a box so that they feel comfortable with how he's presented instead of just accepting the character for what he is. Which is insane because there's very few medias where you can have a black man beat the hell out of a white woman and still have him come out deemed as the most morally correct character in the entire show. But alas, maybe one day we'll get a fandom that genuinely cares about black characters as it does the rest of the cast and will engage with them the same way they do for everyone else. For now though, Echo, Mel, Ambessa, and Savika, even though I know she's not black, get behind me. Anyways, I don't have anything clever to say at the end of this video, so read my fanfiction. I just posted chapter 39, which I'm pretty sure you guys can guess the contents of just by the title alone. Now I want to clarify, I wasn't necessarily referring to their behaviors, I was more so referring to the fact that I think Stolitz and Kate Vi have a lot of similarities in how poorly written they are, although now that I'm thinking about it, Amanda Overton is kind of weird when it comes to black women. But that's a topic I already talked about in a different video, go check it out in the playlist if you want. That being said, Stolitz, Kate Vi, kind of the same ship in a different font. Both are queer relationships that take center stage in their respective medias and involve two characters from drastically different class backgrounds that end up causing conflict in the relationship, or at least the shows try to give the illusion of such. But the most significant connective factor between these two relationships is the fact that it's very obvious that both the authors are terrified of aptly holding their characters accountable at any given time. I know there are 3 exec writers that worked on Arcane season 2, but I'm pinning the way Caitlyn is written on Amanda Overton because it's obvious that she views her as some sort of self-insert, and I also think she was the only one who gave a crap about Caitlyn's character in season 2, which resulted in why we got what we got. But I'm sure I don't need to explain for the 50 millionth time how Caitlyn is infantilized throughout the entirety of season 2. So let's talk about how Stolitz is infantilized instead, mainly Stolas. I'd just like to clarify, it it has been kind of a while since I've touched anything Hell of a Boss related, so if I get anything inaccurate, please forgive me, but I do think I've got the general gist down. Anyhow, if there was a single scene that could suitably exemplify my entire issue with how Stolitz is written, it's the scene in the season 2 finale in which a woman who I'm sure Vivzy only intends for us to ever describe as a bitch asks for her husband to be assassinated because she cannot stand the fact that someone who cheated on her with a man is being happy on Christmas with her daughters. She's loud, pushy, and vaguely homophobic, and it is quite literally for no other reason than to make our two main characters feel better about the bad stuff they have done. Now, don't get me wrong, there is obviously nuance in Stolas and Blitz's situation, but regardless of that, their actions have still hurt innocent people, and it's obvious that they're meant to be going on some sort of growth/redemption arc, which is absolutely fine, encouraged even. But the way to do that is to not create side characters purely for the sake of plot devising sympathy from your audience. Like what? Especially when it's from the actions that realistically they should be held accountable for. You know what would have been way more impactful and would have made me way more sympathetic to these two's relationship? Having them actually be faced with someone who was negatively impacted by cheating who did not deserve to be. To me, that would have been actual character growth. And I say this all the time with Kate Vi. I truly don't believe you can begin a redemption arc for someone if you don't actually have them faced with the consequences of their actions. It's also just another case in the long line of them of how Vivzy continuously only includes female characters in her works purely to elevate the existence of the male characters, especially in Hell of a Boss. Like, I get she's a side character, but it doesn't really change that this is a pattern. With that being said, I do have to give credit where credit is due. There was a whole episode revolving around Blitz realizing that he screwed a lot of people's lives over and that he has to change. Now, Stolas, on the other hand, let's just say it's very clear who the Caitlyn in the relationship is. Grass is green take. Stolas is a very bad father, borderline abusive in his neglect. And yet I feel like this is obvious to everyone except Vivian, which is concerning because she is the writer. I know I talked about this before, but it truly is such a 4D chess move to have Octavia bring up the pills and suggest that her dad is using them because he hates her in the middle of her otherwise very valid crash out. To me, it just entirely reads as Vivzy Pop knowing that Octavia has a right to be mad at Stolas, but really not wanting to hold Stolas accountable, and so she essentially pulls a Maud and Bailey by having Octavia switch from her very valid grievances about how her father is never in her corner for blaming her father for taking drugs and insinuating that it means he doesn't care about her, which feels like a very deliberate yet subtle ploy to devalidate Octavia's extremely valid reaction to Stolas' behavior by boiling it down to a misunderstanding merely derived from a series of miscommunications on Octavia's part, probably because she's a hormonal and emotional stupid little teenager, instead of acknowledging the very real role that Stolas' neglect had to play in any of this. I'm not the only one who sees it, right? Oh, and of course we can't forget the fact that a massive hurdle in Stolas and Blitz's relationship was the fact that Blitz believes that Stolas viewed him as a plaything because of the class conflict in their world, and Stolas had to spend all this time convincing Blitz that he viewed him as an equal just to essentially prove Blitz right the second they become the same status. Like, don't get me wrong, I know he's grieving and in general he's in a different world, but at the very least you have this as an established flaw of your world. Have someone call it out. But hey, I guess having class conflicts that are only ever utilized when you need some mid-melodrama is another thing that both Stolitz and Kate Vi can have in common. TLDR, Stolitz is kind of yaoi Kate Vi. But we're not done there. To keep this video from being way too long, I was rewatching Hazbin Hotel recently and I was like, holy crap, this is basically Arcane season 2 if it didn't have amazing animation. Not necessarily the plot, but rather the issues that both of them have. The first obvious one is that both Hazbin Hotel and Arcane season 2 have a clear rushing issue. With Arcane, it reads as the writers were clearly tired of these characters and wanted to move on to bigger and better things, whereas with Hazbin Hotel, it feels like a very clear case of not being able to kill your babies. Basically, Vivzy Pop wanted to go in with so many plots and so many ideas, and her refusal to take any of them out ended up overall just lowering the quality of the show. Secondly, the way that Hazbin often overuses cursing and vulgarity, probably in an attempt to hide the fact that the show isn't actually that deep or mature, probably because it's going through all of its plot lines at mock speed, is pretty much identical to how Arcane uses aura farming and hype moments for the exact same reason. I'm not kidding. If you have it in you to rewatch season 2, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Anytime you start to question how we even got here in the process of a character's development, you'll immediately get hit with a character in the coldest fit you have ever seen, giving you the most fake deep monologue you've ever heard. That, or they'll hit you with a music video. Hey, wasn't a massive part of Jinx's season 1 arc conclusion the fact that she came to terms with being Jinx? Why would she say so casually that Jinx is dead? I will say though, it's a much more stimulating alternative than watching a character try to see how many times they can fit the F word into a sentence anytime the scene gets even remotely too tense. And last but definitely not least, both Arcane season 2 and Hazbin Hotel have a lesbian couple that is meant to be the main relationship and the center of the show, but ends up being overshadowed by literally anything and everything in their respective shows. The difference is Shaggy fans know that they were done dirty, whereas Kate Vi fans are still holding out hope that the writers gave even the tiniest crap about them. You know what, I've actually wanted to talk about this one for a while. I think my ideas are kind of all over the place, but don't worry, just stick with me. High key, even from season 1, I didn't really vibe with Vander. Like, I liked him as a father figure, but he was kind of the Heimendinger of the political plot, and what I mean by that is that they're both the main carriers of the show's centrist messaging, and it makes it hard for me to connect with him because he quite literally is contained to season 1 act 1 aside from the sisters' memories, which is fine on paper the same way that it's fine that Milo and Clagger were, but because of the fact that Vander's ideology is such a big part of the show, it just doesn't match the amount of plot significance he himself has. There's not much context or insight we get into his mindset, and the little bit we do get got completely retconned in season 2. One of the little things I always gave Vander's character pre-season 2 is how impactful that opening scene was and how much you could feel that it really altered his worldview. Because when you watch watch that opening scene, you see a man fighting against his oppressors, but then realizing how much carnage it has caused. And he witnesses that through the biggest signifier of innocence that there is, children. And he is so moved by these children, he does not know that he drops his representation of violence right there and then in favor of picking up and protecting these children. And this opening scene alone is the main reason I can tolerate Vander's centrism, because you can truly feel how he's conflicted between choosing to fight for his community and choosing to protect his community. And if it weren't for the fact that they're so insistent on pretending that Vander was correct the entire time, then yeah, I would really mess with him as a character. But then skip to season 2 and that entire thing gets retconned. Now Vander knew these kids the whole time, and it seems even possibly had a part in their upbringing. So it removes that hard-hittingness of Vander dropping everything to protect them, because of course he's going to. He has a prior obligation to these children. It's not that him knowing and caring for these children beforehand makes what he did any less valid, but it does make it narratively 10 times less impactful. It also seems like a blatant last-minute retcon, because nothing about these characters' interaction in season 1 act 1 implies that they knew these children before that day on the bridge, or that they knew them at all. Cough cough Silco. And speaking of Silco, for basically the exact same reasons, this retcon also waters down his choice to pick up Powder that day. But back to Vander, man, I'm serious. This retcon doesn't only mess up his character, it actually kind of affects other characters as well. For example, the show seems to convey to us in season 1 act 1 that Vander and Powder have some kind of distance, and that Vander finds it hard to relate to Powder. Maybe this is just me, but I always interpreted that as a trauma response to the day on the bridge, and as a result, Powder refusing to let in any parental figures, making Vi her main maternal figure, which explains and really exacerbates just how much codependency Powder had when it came to Vi. But in season 2, damn near Vi and Vander don't exist, and suddenly Powder is the golden child. I'm so serious, Vi got a hug and that's it. This man didn't even see her face in his hallucination, which, as I've said before, was 100% another way the writers trick you into thinking that Vi didn't have any family, and thus feeling okay with the fact that the only person she has is Caitlyn by the end of the show. Speaking of retcons, let's talk about the fact that the flashback fight between Vander and Silco in season 1 was never intended to be about the bridge. Not only does Vander have an explicitly younger model than he has when he finds Powder and Vi on the bridge, but it just makes no sense narratively. If this scene is meant to be representative of Vander choosing peace and pacifism, why the fuck would he go and beat Silco's ass after this? What, you're telling me he put down the gauntlets, put the kids to bed, picked them back up, and whooped Silco? I know people were pretty upset about them retconning the fact that Victor was 100% not the wizard in season 1, but personally, this is the retcon that makes no sense to me. And I know you guys say I'm too harsh on the writers and that it's Netflix's fault, blah blah blah. No, the writers straight up didn't care, and I've been trying to tell y'all that months ago. This is the work of someone who wants to get this out of the way as soon as possible so they can move on to their MCU ripoff. I know it's not related to the video, but I still cannot get over the fact that Christian Link really sat here and told us all to our faces that Vi wanted Powder to fight when she was younger. The same Vi that told Milo to shut his damn trap when he suggested that Powder should take a punch. Be so fucking for real. If I could shrink Powder and put her in her pocket for the rest of her life, I promise you she would do it within an instant. What are we talking about? I know that had nothing to do with the video, but I just had to get it off my chest. Anyhow, I just want to add, it's not that I don't think this idea of them all knowing each other before the kids were born could have worked. In fact, I actually included that as an aspect of my Switch AU. The difference there is that I changed the events in Act 1 and leading up to Act 1 to make it fit. But with Season 2's reveal, you can very much tell they just try to force it in there without much thought as to how it changes the perception of Season 1 for the worse. And I think that is truly the final nail in the coffin for characters who weren't even involved in Season 2 still somehow managing to get ruined by it. Absolutely no hate to this commenter at all. They were actually asking the question in a very respectful manner. I'm only replying to them because they are the most recent example I have of somebody using this logic. But ever since it was becoming increasingly obvious that Caitlyn was coming out as one of the not so favored characters in Season 2, her fans have been consistently asking why there's so much hatred for her and not other villains of the show. And it's funny because the argument in and of itself is kind of an answer. The fact that Caitlyn is consistently compared to the villains of the show yet is never really considered a villain herself should make it very obvious as to why a lot of people do not really like her. But you know what? I had a stressful day and this is therapeutic for me, so let's go deeper. At the risk of me rehashing the countless points I've made about why Caitlyn's writing failed in Season 2, I feel like I can summarize my grievances all into one sentence. That Season 2 Caitlyn was a failed attempt at recreating Season 1 Jinx, which funnily enough is one of the characters she is most infamously compared to when being asked why there's a double standard for liking Jinx and not her. And truthfully, the answer for this comes in two parts: the diegetic reasons, aka the in-universe information we are given about these characters that color our perception of them, and the non-diegetic reasons, aka the very poor choices the writers made during Season 2. Starting off diegetic, the fact that Jinx was 10 when she was taken in by Silco, and the fact that Caitlyn was 25 when she was manipulated by Mbessa. Not that you can't be manipulated as a grown person, especially since Mbessa is significantly older, but it is a lot more easier to sympathize with a child being taken advantage of than it is an adult. Secondly, the fact that Jinx has gone through considerably way more than Caitlyn ever had. I promise I'm not trying to play Trauma Olympics, but it is true. Caitlyn went through a fraction of what any character from Zaun went through and turned into a dictator overnight. Like, in the context of trying to recreate Jinx's arc, it just does not work in the same way. It does not hit the same. And then of course we have the positions of power that the show sets up for these characters. Whether the writers intended it or not, the majority of the audience came out of Season 1 hating the council and seeing them as the ultimate villains of the show. Having Caitlyn then join the council makes it very hard for her to be reconciled with. Especially in this political climate, having her effectively becoming the dictator for a fascist regime, yeah, it's gonna be hard for the audience to let that slide. Again, as opposed to Jinx, who doesn't really have any systemic power over anybody. So yeah, off the bat, there are already a lot of hurdles before you even consider writing that would make it hard for audiences to be open to Jinx being a reflection of Caitlyn or vice versa. But even then, I don't view any of these things as inherent deal breakers. More so, this is just context to add that it was already going to be an uphill battle from the start, so the fact that they didn't put much effort into writing this character was the final nail in the coffin, which leads me on to my non-diegetic reasons, aka the writing, of which the issues can be broken down again into two parts. These two parts specifically revolving around Caitlyn's relationship with another character, that being Mbessa. And the reason I bring her up is that obviously the main point of connection between Jinx and Caitlyn is that they're both having their trauma being taken advantage of by somebody. For Jinx, that's Silco. For Caitlyn, that's Ambessa. But when you actually take a moment to look and compare the relationships shown on screen between these two characters in their respective seasons, you will truly begin to understand why season 2 Caitlyn is nothing but a poor man's season 1's Jinx. The aforementioned first part is frequency, as in we barely see Caitlyn and Ambessa interact on screen. In fact, if I remember correctly, there are only 2 times in the entire 9 episodes where they have a one-on-one direct conversation, both of which feel like they rely heavily on expository dialogue for us to understand their dynamic. Basically, the writers are desperately telling the audience what they want us to think the relationship is, but they don't actually take any time to show that. The extent of body language communication we get between the two is the one-sided facial expressions from Caitlyn, which are more there to serve as a way to show us that she doesn't want to do this, in a very on-the-nose way, may I add, but completely negates to show us or even tell us why she feels like she has to in the first place. And from what I can gather, this is completely in line with the writers thinking that it is unnecessary to have repetition in shows, which is crazy because maybe this is just me, but if we were only told once or twice that Vi and Jinx cared about one another, I don't think I care about their relationship as much as I do. If we were only told once or twice that Silco cared about Jinx, I don't think I believe in their relationship as much as I do. Nor do I think rushed exposition dumps would be enough to convince me of the complexities and nuances of Jinx and Silco's relationship. It would not be enough to give me the insight on just how much Silco had warped Jinx's mind. Speaking of making Ambessa's impact on Caitlyn as believable as Silco's on Jinx's is, having Caitlyn decide to betray Ambessa in a blink and you'll miss it moment was certainly a choice. The manipulation you were relying on so heavily to make your character redeemable is foiled by a character seeing someone that they had full ability to reach out to this whole time? Right. But you know what? I don't even need to talk about the scene to show you how dumb it is. I can just talk about a way greater scene in comparison. Vi and Jinx's reunion in season 1. Here we see 2 sisters who have been forcefully separated from one another. 2 sisters whose bond we witnessed and were truly convinced of how much they loved and cared about one another. And that is still not enough. Jinx does not magically become okay because Vi appears. Yes, she's angry at Silco, but she does not throw him under the bus or even abandon him because of what he did. The show knows that Jinx loves Vi, but it also knows that it is not realistic for Jinx to just drop Silco at the drop of a dime. Nor can merely Vi being there erase the impact that Silco has had on her, which is what makes the scene when Silco and Vi are arguing at the tea party so impactful to me. It plays on our expectations of a villain redemption arc. When Vi is calling out to Powder is meant to replicate the moment where the hero calls out to the villain and helps them come back to the light, but that's not how it works. And if anything, she completely unintentionally so makes the situation worse. And that is a real depiction of how abuse and grooming and manipulation warps you, which is why this scene is so insulting by comparison. Again, so much emphasis is put on Ambessa being to blame for Caitlyn's extreme actions, yet what control does Ambessa really show that she has over Caitlyn? The more you think about it, it just becomes very obvious that Ambessa's only reason for even having a relationship with Caitlyn in the first place is to act as the scapegoat for her actions. And don't even get me started on how messed up that is. But yeah, you can just take any plot beat in Caitlyn's season 2 arc and compare it to season 1 Jinx, and that will speak volumes for itself as to why season 2 Caitlyn sucks so much. To be fair, season 2 Jinx sucks as well, but at least she had a somewhat more tolerable personality. Anyways, I know I said this was supposed to be cathartic, but halfway through recording, I remember that there are people who genuinely prefer season 2 over season 1, and now I need to go lay down because I have a headache. Bye guys. Okay, I'll bite. Silco Caitlyn parallels. Let's talk about them. Adapted from the slideshow I made of this talking point a while ago. Now I'd like to clarify something before I even dare to get into this. This is more conceptual than anything. This is not me speaking positively about Caitlyn's character in season 2, but more so about how the concepts of what they wanted to do with her could have fit well into a Silco Caitlyn parallel. And honestly, I do find it hilarious that she reads as a better parallel for Silco than she does Jinx, and it being purely because the writers really didn't put that much care into her character. But anyways, let's just get straight into it.
So starting off, the way this parallel works to me is that they have similar story beats, but the way that those story beats happen is reflective of the differences between Piltover and Zaun as a whole.
Okay, so starting off, we know that both Caitlyn and Silco began out as idealists who wanted to create change for the better. For Caitlyn, her idealism seems to stem from this resentment that her mother has hidden the real world from her and a fixation on justice. Whereas for Silco, it's a promise to a friend to create a better future for her children. And whilst Caitlyn definitely wants to protect people, at this point in time, she doesn't really have anyone to protect because everyone she knows is fairly safe. So this is more about her own want to see the world rather than a representation of any tangible community, as opposed to Silco, who is doing this for his community. Or at least that's how it starts out. And I believe these two's motivations serve as an overall microcosm to the greater individualism versus collectivism between Piltover and Zaun. As akin to real life, it seems that Zaun has a much greater emphasis on community and family than Piltover does. You get what I mean now when I say they have similar plot beats, but they're colored in the entirely opposite ways to reflect the greater Piltover-Zaun image. Anyhow, moving on, then both of them experience a perceived betrayal at the hands of the ones that they started their journey out with. And the reason I say perceived is because for Caitlyn, this person would be Vi, specifically when Vi stops her from shooting Jinx. Either time, you can pick. But unlike Vander straight up trying to murder Silco, we know that Vi wasn't trying to betray Caitlyn. We know that she had her good intentions, but Caitlyn is always going to see this as a betrayal on Vi's behalf. And yet here, this act of betrayal is so much more passive than the ruthlessness, the brutality of someone you know and love trying to murder you. The difference in directness between these betrayals is another reflection of the circumstances that Caitlyn and Silco grew up in. And then it is these betrayals that kickstart these characters going down a path of corruption, poisoning the dream that they once had to change the world for the better and turning them into an active part of the problem. Now again, I'd like to remind you guys that this is more conceptual than anything because again, the show does not write Caitlyn in season 2 very well at all, but I think it's safe enough to say that Caitlyn is pretty much handed her position of power on a silver platter, whereas Silco had to use brute force and strategy. Zaun Piltover reference again. And without getting too much into both of their respective atrocious crimes, ultimately they both have some sort of responsibility to Zaun, but end up thwarting it for what is really their own goals, but they tell themselves is the greater good. For Silco, that is achieving a free Zaun, and for Caitlyn, that is killing Jinx. Additionally, children are used as the main vehicles to represent just how corrupt Silco and Caitlyn have become, because children are usually symbols of purity and innocence in media. With Silco, it's him being so obsessed with killing Vander that he's willing to sick his grown men on a teenage Vi. And with Caitlyn, it's her being indifferent to blowing out a child's brains if it means that she can kill Jinx. And before you guys start arguing in the comments, no, it was not 100% guaranteed that Caitlyn had that shot. It was not even mostly guaranteed. 1, the hex tech was freaking the hell out, which is completely outside of Caitlyn's control. 2, she is clearly not in her right mind as the show is trying to scream to you. And 3, she literally misses the most open of open shots like seconds before and gets Jinx's finger instead of her very clear head. Whether you love or hate Caitlyn, it is very obvious that there is a deathly risk to Isha at this point in time. And narratively, the point is Caitlyn is too consumed by her grief and revenge to care. Sorry, tangent. Moving on. Just when Silco and Caitlyn are closest to achieving their goals, they're faced with something that ultimately forces them to acknowledge the error of their ways. And this is where I remind you guys that this is conceptual because Caitlyn does nothing of the sort, but let's just pretend that she didn't keep rolling with the parallel. Both of these revelations specifically revolve around love, fitting into the whole love is the greatest motivator theme from Arcane as a whole. With Silco, it's him realizing that just like Vander, he's not immune to the bonds that he's made, and he can similarly not force himself to break them for the sake of his goals. And with Caitlyn, I'd say it's realizing that not only does Vi love Jinx, but Jinx has people that she loves and cares about, and vice versa, people who feel like that about her, which not only makes it hard to reconcile with the heartless monster image she had imprinted in her mind of Jinx, but I feel like it also puts her in a position where she would have to do to someone what someone has done to her, causing her to finally realize that this has all just been a cycle, and if she does it to Jinx, what stops it from Isha doing it to her in the future, etc, etc. Again, emphasizing conceptual. Caitlyn shows no signs of understanding this at any point in time in the show. I think I genuinely have a heart attack and die if somebody accused me of ever praising Caitlyn's season 2 arc. Moving on, both of their arcs finish off as a cautionary tale to the cycle of violence, another theme present in the show, with Silco being unable to escape his hand in the cycle and ultimately succumbing to that violence in the form of Jinx, someone who he imprinted the same thing into. But with Caitlyn, as she comes to understand the cycle and realizes that all she's doing is perpetuating it, she manages to not only escape it but has a hand in breaking it. Or she would have if the writers had a single fuck to give about her character. And if you're on my wavelength, then you probably thought about the fact that Silco and Caitlyn both lost the same eye. Not only that, but they both lose their eyes in the pursuit of trying to do the right thing, which aligns with Silco losing it at the beginning of his journey when he's attacked by Vander, and him being punished for trying to do the right thing is a signifier of his descent into corruption. Whereas with Caitlyn, she loses her eye at the end of her story in an attempt to try and rectify what she did wrong. Instead of serving as a punishment like it does to Silco, it serves as a lesson. If you notice, Caitlyn's Act 2 design looks eerily similar to Silco's Act 3 design, which I think is really cool. Of course, it could be that that type of fashion invokes a sense of power and that's what they were going for, but I think it's really cool regardless. I mean, even down to the color. Also, the literary irony of Caitlyn opposing Silco in season 1 for good reason, only then to go down the exact same route as him in season 2. And I don't say that as an insult to her character, I think it's actually very interesting, or potentially could have been. Also, the parallel is obviously not one-on-one. Silco was in power for way longer than Caitlyn. This is not meant to be a, oh, Caitlyn is just as bad as Silco, da-da-da. This is actually a genuine analysis about how truly interesting the parallel between these two is. With all that being said, give me your guys' opinions, what do you think? And I guess this also makes Zondat and Cake Vi parallels, which I am obsessed with. I know y'all are watching my videos about Caitlyn thinking like, damn, we almost got her out of the fandom, but she went right back in.
I'm back in the fucking building again!
In my defense, someone asked me to talk about this video, and it is a new point, I think. I'm not just rehashing stuff I've talked about, or at least I hope I'm not. Anyway, someone sent me this video, and I genuinely mean this when I say I don't have no hate or bad feelings toward this creator. I disagree with their take, but that's it. I disagree with people's takes all the time. This person, I don't think this person's a bad person at all. Don't harass them or nothing. Anyways, their video was basically saying if you don't like Cake Vi because Caitlyn hit Vi, then you shouldn't like Time Bomb because Jinx and Echo fought. And like, I think that conversation has kind of been deaded. As much as people have come to accept the issues about Time Bomb, I think most people have also come to understand that there is a difference between fighting someone head on when you don't have any obligations to them and you're fighting on equal footing, and hitting your romantic partner in the stomach when they weren't expecting it. But I can at least understand where the logic comes from to compare those two situations. But then the creator brings up another character you're supposed to hate if you hate Caitlyn for hitting Vi, and it's Vi herself, because 15-year-old Vi hit Powder. And I don't know if I ever got the chance to let you guys know that the hatred I have for this theory, parallel, whatever you want to call it, genuinely outburns hell itself. But I'm letting y'all know now because it's genuinely idiotic. Like, no, 15-year-old Vi witnessing her entire family die brutally before her eyes, and then watching her father die in her arms seconds before Powder popped around the corner and was like, hey man, everything that happened, that was me, and then slapping her, is nowhere near comparable to 25-plus-year-old Caitlyn hitting her girlfriend in the stomach with a weapon. Mind you, Vi is a victim of abuse, and Caitlyn knows this because Vi wouldn't let her blow a child's brains out. And this was like the prime defense for Caitlyn when Act 1 came out. It made me sick. But the thing is, I can't even be too mad at people like this creator because the writers literally encouraged this interpretation. In fact, I'm like 99% sure they've gone on record to say the reason why Vi forgave Caitlyn was because Vi was in Caitlyn's position back when she hit Powder, and I'm just sat here like, no, the fuck, she was not. Also, come on, Vi going back to someone who put hands on her, or I guess I should say weapons on her, because she did something in a very traumatic situation as a teenager that she perceives to be equal to this, despite the fact that it is insanely, vastly different. How were we supposed to come out of season 2 thinking that Vi was anything but a victim? Anyways, while also here, people were asking me if I was going to tune into the Arcane subreddit, Ask Me Anything with the writers, and to that I have to say I don't feel like blowing my brains out right now, so so unfortunately I'll have to pass. But some of the discourse has managed to find me anyhow. So you remember Loris, the guy that had no character beyond looking like Vander in order to haunt Vi because we needed the illusion that she still had some sort of character? Yeah, apparently he was gay, like canonically. He had a male partner that died in the Day of Ash, the genocide that happened in the first episode of season 1. And I think everyone's collective response to this was, "Aw, but why?" Like, don't get me wrong, his backstory was interesting. Like, he lost someone in that genocide, so he gave up the Enforcers, but after seeing Vi join the Enforcers after losing someone, he follows in her footsteps. Like, that is all really cool. But it's kind of wasted on a guy that has less screen time than Smeech, no? I think people are also kind of upset because they just confirmed the first Achillean character in the show, and it's a year after he died. Like, what? Like, I've heard of the bury your gays trope before, but I've never heard of it being done a year after the character died. But to be fair, by the end of season 2, they basically buried their gays narratively, so they might as well have done it literally. I'm not surprised. Also, apparently, basically all the questions about Echo got deleted by the Reddit moderators, which I shouldn't be surprised. It is called the RKKK fandom for a reason, but that sucks because Echo is the main one I wanted to know more about. Like, what do you mean you're deleting questions about the boy who literally threw time at a god and defeated him, but the girl who gassed the city gets a whole dissertation worth of answers? I'm still sick, and we all know whose fault it is. Caitlyn Karaman. So obviously I gotta talk about her again. So I saw an argument break out in my comment section a while ago, and it was basically about Caitlyn, Isha, Jinx, and was Caitlyn actually trying to shoot Isha and all that, and da-da-da-da-da, and it was a massive argument. Like, I think it had like 50 comments under it. So I know I love when y'all argue in the comments and it's not involving me, because I'll just be sitting there watching like, damn. Point is, that comment thread, specifically the Caitlyn fans, and it really reminded me that despite saying that everyone else doesn't understand her character, Caitlyn fans are truly the ones who don't understand her the most. And take this from me, because as much as I don't like Caitlyn's writing, I've gone on record to say multiple times, out of all of the acts, she's at her best in Act 1. And so it's just really frustrating to see people thwart what little good writing she does have. For example, I don't know where they got this from, well, I think I do, when a lot of Caitlyn fans genuinely believe in their heart of hearts that Caitlyn gassed the Undercity as a way to protect them from a full-scale invasion. And where I assume they got this from was from episode 1, where she did want to protect Zahn and was advocating against a full-scale invasion, instead saying that they only needed to get Jinx. What they forget is that that is episode 1. She has completely changed her tune in episode 3 and says herself that Piltover is not prepared for a full-scale invasion. Don't believe me? Roll the clip.
If we do not defend ourselves with Hextech, our principles will mean nothing.
We aren't prepared for a full-scale invasion. The Undercity's attack proved that. We aren't prepared for a full-scale invasion. The Undercity's attack proved that.
And at no point does she ever mention her priorities or objectives involving Zaunite's safety. And I'm not saying that to slander her, that makes perfect sense for her character development at this point. So aside from arguing about her morality, this idea that Caitlyn was doing it because lesser of two evils just doesn't make sense narratively. Because the point of her gassing the Undercity in the first place is to show just how drastic of a toll her grief has taken on her, to the point where she's flouting one of her core character traits, her kindness. She no longer cares about protecting the people, all she cares about is getting revenge. You'd think that was pretty fucking obvious, but I guess not. It's such a simple character arc as well. Character has a little bit of hope left, hope gets dashed, gloves come off. Like, have you guys ever watched the show before? But that's not even the worst one. No, the worst one is when they argue about whether or not Caitlyn would have actually hit Isha. Hey geniuses, the whole point is that the show is clearly trying to communicate to us that at this point, Caitlyn is prioritizing killing Jinx over the life of this child. The show is clearly screaming at you that there is a plausible chance that Caitlyn would have blasted Isha's brains all over that altar. And what it's trying to tell us is that in that moment, she wouldn't have cared as long as it meant that she shot Jinx.
Which isn't slander, it's literally just her character arc. Do you hear that? Am I speaking slowly enough for you guys? And it's so insane to me because what about this right here, this image, conveys to you that this is a mentally stable person? Or what about the scene in the arcade where she's so paranoid she blasts a hole through one of the arcade games? We literally hear her heart pounding out of her chest. I'm sorry to say, this woman is not in her right mind. Which, again, is the point. I used to joke that the reason the majority of Caitlyn fans have such bad media literacy is because instead of actually watching the show, they just spent the whole thing looking at her hips. Yeah, I don't think it's a joke anymore. And whilst we're here, something I wanted to get off my chest for a long time. Caitlyn fans, if you really do believe that Caitlyn gassing Zahn was for the greater good, why aren't the Zahnites praising her? Why are they putting up murals of Jinx instead of her? Why are they crossing her eyes out on her poster? I don't know, man. If the show was trying to convince us that Caitlyn was even remotely right for that, I feel like that wouldn't be the way they went about it. Like, imagine being such a brutally fascist leader that the people turn around and start worshipping the local drug lord Kingpin's daughter.
I don't think we ever truly processed just how insane it was for Christian Lake to say that Vi was neglected because they found other characters' stories more interesting, just for the entirety of the season to be shit. Like, the implication that the writing and conclusion that we got in season 2 was worth sacrificing Vi's entire character is so embarrassing. Why do they hate her so much?
I can't believe it. I'm gonna say something positive about Arcane season 2, guys. I know. I never thought the day would come either, but here we are. I guess pigs can fly, right? No. I just figured for all the shit I talk about Arcane season 2, there are two very specific scenes that I did actually like, and even would go as far as to say that they're on the level of season 1's writing. And you know what? Before anything anything, let's turn this into a little game. Pause, write in the comments, what scenes do you think I'm going to talk about? What scenes do you think I think are on the level of season 1 in season 2? Okay, I'll give you a few seconds. 1, 2, 3, time's up. Okay, so it's the scene where Jinx is talking to Silco's chair and the scene where Mel confronts Mbessa in like episode 9, I think. Those are the 2 scenes that I think are the only good in season 2. So let's start with the Jinx and Silco chair scene. Listen, we all know that the animation carried season 2 because the writing was not there. But by God, if this scene is not truly exemplary of how visuals are meant to be supplementary to already good writing and not meant to single-handedly carry it. The way Silco's chair temporarily covers Jinx as it spins in the intervals between her dialogue, not only can you hear her unraveling, you can see it, because every time that chair reveals Jinx, she becomes more and more desperate. And despite the fact that there are no hallucinations in this scene, you can still perfectly see just how unhinged Jinx is becoming. Her dialogue starts off very calm, cool, collected, lighthearted jokes, and yet there's no response, which causes her emotions to descend into anger and rage, and yet still no response until she curls up into a ball and accepts defeat. And that scene is wrapped up in a nice little bow with the final shot of the chair finally facing the audience, letting us see that it is empty. And despite the fact that we knew Silco wasn't going to be there, it hurts all the same because it's finally solidifying that no one is coming to save Jinx. She's on her own. Some say the acceptance stage of grief is just as painful as the initial grief in and of itself, and this scene represents that so well. Because despite having seen Silco die with our own eyes, it's a whole different ballpark having to accept that he's truly gone forever, for both the audience and Jinx. The grief is so tangible here, and honestly the fact that it's probably one of the only scenes throughout the entirety of season 2 that acknowledges Jinx's grief towards Silco definitely helps it standing. And I'd honestly argue this is one of the moments in the show where you can justify the lack of Jinx's hallucinations, because it shows that she can't even rely on her own twisted mind to comfort her anymore. A wonderful scene in isolation. Its only downside is that it has fundamentally no relevance to Jinx's character arc this season, because she doesn't do anything with her grief, and the show barely acknowledges it point blank period. Anyhow, before I get too bogged down on criticisms, Mel and Mbessa. Another wonderful scene. The fact that the scene opens with Mbessa trying to hug Mel, one of the few times we see her showing genuine affection throughout the entire show, only for it to be immediately rejected by Mel, and to see Mbessa visibly hardened up at that rejection, oh my god, that hurts. Because we know Mbessa is a horrible person, but we also know she does these things for the people that she loves. So to see her being rejected by Mel, it puts that feeling of regret that you can see in the way that she immediately puts her guard back up. And honestly, the more and more Mel questions Mbessa, you can tell that she's panicking, and this is the first time we're seeing her lose her cool throughout the entire series. And it's the idea that her love for her children isn't true that is causing her to spiral. And as much as that slap took me the fuck off guard, you can tell that it's very natural for Mbessa, a little clue as to the type of environment she probably grew up in herself. Ellen Thomas, rent must have been due because I can hear the grief bleeding out of every syllable that Mbessa speaks. Unlike anything else in the series, the dialogue feels raw and natural. It doesn't feel like it's relying on pre-existing tropes for you to just understand the bond between Mbessa and Mel. No, they are forcing you to understand them through the screen. And as much as I complain that they practically throw away Mel for the entire season, which they do, the fact that Mel and Mbessa can have a more complex, nuanced relationship on screen despite having 10 times less screen time than the literal main characters Vi and Jinx is insane. Like, genuinely give me one piece of dialogue between Vi and Jinx that is on the level of, I nursed him from my bosom, he was all the sweetness in my heart, and they carved into me a wound that will never close. You just can't. And the good moments like these are so annoying because it makes you wonder, why couldn't you do this for the entire season? And no, contrary to popular belief, as much as we all hate big corporations, the writing team has made it astoundingly clear that they are the ones who wanted to rush their series. They are the ones who only wanted 2 seasons, and they are very happy with how they managed to cram everything in. But on the bright side, apparently a few of the writers who were cut from season 1 feel that season 2 is just as badly written as the rest of us do, so I'm sorry, it's like nearly midnight where I am, and that's where all the thoughts come to me when I need to rant, and I know I've talked about it, but god, I need to go back to this. The arcade scene in Arcane season 2 is so insanely fucked up when you think about it for more than 2 seconds. Vi brings a squad of cops to a place where her and her family used to hide as kids from cops. And what's crazy is they enter through the window that was shattered by an enforcer who threw a man through the wall and proceeded to chase them when they were children. And on top of that, they bring cancerous gas with them. Like, don't get me wrong, there is nothing you can say to make me justify the gassing scene point blank period, but for this you can't even argue that it was a chem barren area. None of these people had any means of determining whether or not this area would be clean, and in fact, if anything, Vi should be more worried about kids hiding here because she used to hide here as a kid. And there's just no concern, no worry. I don't expect Caitlyn to care at this point, but for Vi to show no reservations about targeting that specific area, and to probably have been the one who suggested going there in the first place, that is why people hate her for her enforcer arc. It's not that it's unrealistic or impossible to imagine her becoming an enforcer. No, in fact, like most of the choices in season 2, the concept of them happening is actually very realistic, but the show goes about them in the worst way possible. And when people parallel it to what Jinx was doing in season 1, that makes no sense to me because Jinx is very explicitly in the wrong for what she's doing. She's very explicitly unstable and the antagonist of season 1 as a result. Vi is never portrayed as the antagonist. Vi is never portrayed as doing something openly malicious like Jinx is. This is very fucking malicious in my opinion. Bro, I'm literally gonna be 60 waking up in a cold sweat thinking about how they did Vi so dirty. story. Arcane Season 1 invented a black woman that came from a colonizer nation and had a strained, tumultuous relationship with her daughter. Arcane Season 2 removed all of that, didn't even put it in the backseat, put it in the boot, and turned her into a violent, aggressive warmongerer that exists purely for the sake of making Caitlyn, a non-black character, look more sympathetic. How badly do you have to write your character that you have to pull out the good old model minority myth last minute in order to make us sympathize with her?
While I understand why Powder is a representation of Jinx's innocence just by nature of being a representation of her childhood, it always makes me laugh a little bit when it veers into, oh, Powder was so innocent and so sweet, and she would never do anything like Jinx, and Jinx is crazy and mean and evil. Powder was making bombs with nails in them. And she fully intended for these things to work. What do you think happens when you put nails in a bomb? I'm so sorry, I would rather just get blown up. I don't want to get blown up and have nails in my face. Powder had a few screws loose as well. Let's just put that there. Like, I'm not trying to slander her, but if her bombs had worked, she would have caught bodies long before her family. Maybe Jinx was always in her future. No, obviously I'm joking, but it makes sense, you know, that is the environment she was raised in, and that's why I'm kind of not a fan of the Powder wholeheartedly innocent, Jinx wholeheartedly corrupted and evil kind of perception. I like the idea that they both represent different times in Powder Jinx's life, you know, childhood, adulthood, or adolescence, and both of those come with their own benefits and connotations, you know. Yes, Powder's childhood, and that represents innocence, but that could also represent, you know, naivete, you know, a lack of understanding, ignorance, emotional immaturity, and whilst Jinx is more mature, she's also, you know, she doesn't have that spark about her, no hope, she's lonely, depressed, all of that. Like, I like them both having positive and negative connotations. Or at least that's how I wrote Powdrix from my Arcane AU, so.
On the topic of violence in Zaun, Vander is kind of the weakest written character in Season 1. I know it sounds like it has no correlation, but say it with me. Whilst it took a bit for the rose-colored glasses to fall off, I've known for a while now that Arcane Season 1 was not as politically progressive as I would have liked to think it was. It still has great character writing, great narrative themes, etc., unlike Season 2. With that being said, Vander is kind of the odd one out, aside from the horrible retcon in Season 2, which is pretty much kicking a dead horse. See, I initially interpreted Vander's character as one of that used to believe in the cause for Zaun and used to fight and lead the people, but soon found something to prioritize over that fight, but instead of directly stepping out of the leadership role, he puts on his front to the people, giving them false hope and promises, when in reality, he's kind of given up on them to some extent, or at least given up on the hope that they will overcome Piltover. He's kind of like Lucifer from Hazbin, except he doesn't hate his people, rather he just genuinely does not believe that there will be any chance for them to fight Piltover and come out mostly alive. So he's just kind of reached a state of political apathy, very much willing to be Piltover's token to spend if he keeps his children safe. And as much as I hate centrism, it's a very compelling character conflict, because who here can say that they'd sacrifice their children for a whole city? I mean, most of you couldn't even sacrifice Chloe for Arcadia Bay. Jokes aside, one scene that I think really solidifies my interpretation of Vander is when he and Vi are having that conversation after the heist, and he's scolding her, telling her that violence will not solve their issues, but then proceeds to ask her if she beat up the kids that were following them. AKA discouraging violence against Piltover, but encouraging it against her fellow Zaunites. He's preemptively trying to teach Vi to be docile against her oppressors, whilst giving her the illusion of rebellion by encouraging her fighting with her fellow people. And to clarify, I like this interpretation of Vander. I think it's a very realistic and compelling conflict. No, the issue is later on in a scene with Grayson, where she is like, hey, the council, they're not letting up, we're gonna have to take one of you, just let us take some random person, we'll do it quietly. And then Vander opens his mouth talking about some we don't give our people, as if he hasn't already betrayed his people by trying to keep them docile and working with an enforcer behind their backs. I was so shocked because I thought he would have jumped at that opportunity, considering that he's crossed the line of betraying his people a long time ago. But what's even worse was that he was gonna give himself up. What? Why? I only tolerated this centrist motherfucker because I was under the impression that he was in between a rock and a hard place and was desperately trying to do anything to keep his children safe. Now he's gonna turn around and abandon his children for a cause that he gave up on years ago? Hey, Vander, do you know what happened the second your daughters didn't have a father anymore?
Away! Because you're a jinx!
That happened. I don't understand it. What is the logic? And I'm stuck between they wanted to glaze Vander's centrist ideology like they do every character that has a centrist ideology in the show, cough cough Hermandinger, or they were just genuinely trying to get him in a position where they could kill him off. I don't know, but it's just, I hate it. And unlike Season 2, this is actually a disappointment because Season 1 is really good and all of the characters have very strong directions, even if their direction is having no direction, but Vander just kind of stands there as an odd one out with really inconsistent writing. Hashtag rip Vander, the only non-complex character in Season 1. Anyways, the fact that Vander was kind of coaching Vi to be docile to her oppressors, and that's basically what her ending was, is making me sick, so I'm gonna go throw up now. Bye.
This, 100% this. A lot of people like to act that I'm just being an asshole and I'm hating on a female character for doing bad things, the things that I wouldn't hate on a male character for, but I've gone on record to say multiple times that it's not the morality of the actions, it's the piss poor execution. I've said that so many times. I've gone on record to say that Caitlyn is at her narrative peak in Act 1. Guess when she's also at her most morally bankrupt? Act 1. Caitlyn is a goldmine of complex concepts, but they never come to fruition. It's like having a treasure chest, but no key. What do I look like with a treasure chest just lying around? And whilst yes, everyone in Arcane Season 2 is poorly written, and I made other analysis and rant videos on how everyone else is poorly written, Caitlyn is uniquely shit because she has a mix of writers who did not care about her and writers who cared too much about her. Writers who did not care about her, and so her plotline had no real direction and she's not actually doing anything too important in the story. And a writer who cared too much about her, so for the few times she is doing something important, she's written in a way that is so cowardly, no real consequences can ever stick to her character. And it's like the two worst approaches to writing a character had a baby, and boom, Caitlyn was born. I also do blame how they tried to overall water down the Piltover v Zahn plotline. Like, the only reason that shit survived in the final text was because Fortige was forcing that shit on us. Like, they are the goats. But seriously, like, it's a Netflix show, right? I'm not saying I expected them to come out full French Revolution style and execute the council, but dear God, the way that they approach the oppression plotline is so cowardly. So cowardly. Truly, that is why I believe Victor and Ambessa are written the way they are, so that they do not have to conclude the fact that Piltover is the real villain in all of this. But yeah, that also ends up affecting Caitlyn's character, because if we're not going to get too deep into the oppression plotline, we're not going to get too deep into the character who was oppressing Zahn, which is Caitlyn, at the time. And what's crazy is, I'll say it, when I first finished Arcane Season 1, I was not expecting much from Caitlyn in Arcane Season 2. It's watching Arcane Season 2 that got me mad, because it kind of tricked me into thinking that there was going to be more to her, and then just dropped the ball at every fucking corner. They really said, hey, let's make her a knockoff Jinx in Season 1 and call it a day. And they made, I don't even know what they made Jinx. Don't even talk to me about Jinx. The only butch thing about Vi is how she was butchered. I know this is late, but I saw an edit of Felicia and Jinx on my page, and this just came into my head. Do y'all notice how they gave Jinx all the family ties in Season 2? Like, Felicia is so akin to Jinx, yet shares very little traits with Vi, to the point where when I first saw her on my screen, I was like, is Ella Purnell voicing her too? Like, she shares so much with Jinx. Her hair color is closer to Jinx, and I get it, it's violet because it's red and blue, but come on. It looks so much more blue than it does red. Fucking, she shares the mannerisms of Jinx and, like, the playful tone much more with Jinx. We barely see anything of hers relating to Vi, except in that little, like, watercolor sequence. And it's so obvious that the show is trying to act like Vi doesn't have these insanely strong familial ties, if not more stronger than Jinx does. This includes her relationship with Vander/Warwick. Listen, I'm not saying that Vander and Powder did not care about each other or love each other in Season 1, but what I am saying is that the show made a very intentional choice to show Vander having a much more close relationship, or at least a much more active relationship with Vi, where he feels like he can actually talk to her and reach her, than Powder. That was a choice. And that doesn't mean that he's a bad dad, that doesn't mean that Powder doesn't love him. In my opinion, it just stems from the fact that I don't think Powder really trusted anybody other than Vi as, like, her main parental figure after losing her mother. But the point being, that was a choice they made. And yet, that doesn't come into play in Season 2 at all. It seems as if none of that is remembered, and in fact, if anything, it seems Vander only really interacts with Jinx significantly, and Vi is pushed off to the sidelines. And I know why they do this. They do this so we don't feel weird about the fact that Vi is left in Piltover at the end, isolated, no family, no ties to Zahn, stuck in a city that hates her, with a father-in-law that hates her, with a girlfriend who I'm not sure doesn't hate her. Like, they tried to make us feel better about that by acting as if she never really had any family. That's exactly why they killed Jinx off. It's so stupid. It's so stupid. Honestly, some people feel about Jinx Season 2 the way I feel about Caitlyn Season 2, and genuinely, that is valid. I think the only reason I don't hate Jinx as much is because I can literally just try it and act as if Season 1 doesn't exist, and she's kind of a somewhat bearable standalone character if I'm treating it like a kid's show. But with Caitlyn, it just feels like I'm watching a gameplay of someone intentionally missing all the coins in Subway Surfer, so. But I do get it. 100% I do get it. And it's like one of those things where you come offline and it makes it even worse, because the writers don't know Vi. The writers don't know Vi. This is one of the cases where it's actually valid to say the writers are not a reliable source. Because what do you mean Vi wanted Powder to fight when she was younger? Vi, our differences make us strong? Vi, who literally told Milo off because she didn't want Powder taking a punch? Apparently she didn't want Powder making stuff and wasting her time on bombs. Vi, who was literally the first person to believe that Powder's bombs were gonna work. They did Vi so dirty. Oh my god.
Okay, so this comment is being mad at me, quote unquote, denying Vi being a butch, and it's really funny for two reasons. One, it comes from a video that is a joke. Me saying that the only butch thing about Vi is her being butchered. That was a joke, okay? But also, two, because if you want to get technical about it, no, Vi isn't a butch. And the reason for that is that butch goes beyond just how you appear, just how you dress. Butch is a political identity, and one of the baseline politics is, you guessed it, ACAB. All cops are bastards. And yeah, whilst Arcane is fictional, enforcers are pretty much a one-to-one to real-life police systems, and hell, even comparable to things like ICE. Now, do I care if you call Vi a butch? outrage? No. But I just think the outrage was a little funny because technically, if you want to get down in the dirt about it, she's not. And I think this is where the really important distinction between queer representation and gay representation comes into play. Caitlyn and Vi are gay representation. They do not only not interact with the politics of the queer community, they actively contradict it. And gay representation is still fine, it just isn't really for us. Whereas queer media will take the time to acknowledge and recognize queer identities and the politics behind them. And being anti-police is a cornerstone of all queer communities. No matter who you are, queer people have never been protected by the police. There's a reason we say no cops at Pride. It's not just because we're feeling mean and exclusionary. And butches especially have had a long-standing history of being abused by police officers to the point where there are multiple recorded instances of police taking butches out of gay bars and forcing them to strip naked in the streets. And if you're genuinely interested in learning more about the struggles of butches, a lovely commenter actually recommended to me this book called Stone Butch Blues. I've not read it yet, but it seems to be really informative and it's definitely on my reading list, and I suggested it be on yours too. There's also a website called the Lesbian History Archives if you're just interested in learning more about how politics intersect with lesbian identities in general. But yeah, that's why I always consider it propaganda whenever I see any type of queer character show up as a cop, especially because it's always lesbians. Like, you know we don't mess with you, why are you trying to act like everything's cool? Now you want to know who our real butches? My melanated queens Savika and Gert. We're gonna ignore the fact that Savika's on the council.
So a lot of people have been asking me, Digi, what do you think about people comparing Jinx and Caitlyn? And like, I talked about this before, but I love hearing myself talk, so I'll talk about it again. So first of all, comparing anything from season 2 to season 1, it's a losing game. You know why? Because season 2 is a crock of shit. Even season 2 Jinx and season 1 Jinx doesn't work. There is not a single character in season 2 that can be held to the levels of season 1. Not even nearly, not even remotely. The closest is Mbessa, but even then she's nuked by the fact that she's only included in the story as a scapegoat for Caitlyn, and that her relationship with Mel takes backseat to that for some reason because not a minority myth or something like that. But aside from that obvious baseline of season 2 being awful and season 1 being amazing, you have two main things, right? One, perception in the narrative. Basically, how are these characters treated in the narrative? You notice all the characters that tend to get compared to Caitlyn when being asked why they're not as hated as much are a very specific type of characters, right? I'll give you a hint. Victor, Silco, Mbessa, season 1 Jinx. Very specific type of characters that Caitlyn does not fall into. You wanna guess? Villains, antagonists. They are treated as wrong by the story, and they are acknowledged for the harm that they are causing. And you'd think in comparing these characters, you'd realize what the difference is. The difference isn't anything like, oh, they're a man because you got Mbessa, and Jinx, oh, they're a person of color because you got Mbessa. It's because Caitlyn isn't treated like a villain. And if there's one thing people hate in a story, it's being treated like we're stupid. It's being gaslit. We can tell that Caitlyn has favoritism on her side, and that's why the show isn't letting her be her worst to the full extent. Whereas these four were horrible and were treated as such. They were not babied by the narrative. Even Jinx, yeah, she might be babied by the fandom, but she was not babied by the narrative. When she tried to trick her sister into thinking she decapitated her girlfriend's head, the show didn't back out last minute and be like, oh, but it's not actually bad. No, they stuck with it. They let her sit there in her full villainy. They don't do that for Caitlyn, which is annoying because she is in a league with these characters. She's doing things that are as horrible as these characters, and yet for some reason she gets special treatment. That is annoying. People are gonna dislike that. But there's also another thing, right? And this has more to do with her inherent writing, more to do with the idea that season 2 is shit. See, the thing is, and I've said this before, Season 2 Caitlyn is a poor man Season 1 Jinx. You know what? It's not just Caitlyn though. It's in the entirety of Season 2. The reason Caitlyn just feels like an off-brand Season 1 Jinx is because they rely too heavily on the idea of them two being paralleled in order for Caitlyn to coast off of that concept instead of actually writing her arc. Does that make sense? For example, Mbessa and Caitlyn are very obviously meant to be held up by the bond that has been established by Jinx and Silco in order for us to sympathize with Caitlyn. But Caitlyn and Mbessa barely talk. Silco and Jinx spent a whole fucking season together. We spent a whole season analyzing and seeing their dynamic play out on screen. We get one scene with Mbessa manipulating Caitlyn. It's so obvious that they want you to see the parallels in Mbessa and Caitlyn with Jinx and Silco and use that to automatically fill in the blanks without actually having to put in the effort of writing it themselves. And they say this. The writers have gone on record to say that they don't think it's important to repeat stuff and that they were happy with how rushed they wrote the season. Obviously, they didn't say it like that, but they're happy that they didn't waste time going over stuff. But here's the thing, that's a story. You can't just say something once and expect it to have any impact on the viewer. Take Season 1, for example. If they had only told us once that Vi and Jinx cared about each other, do you think we'd give a shit about their relationship? I hate to tell you this, but no. Do you think if they only told us once that Jinx and Silco cared about each other, you think we give a shit about their relationship? No, you don't just say something once. A story is about building themes, building narratives. You can't just do it once and then be over with it. And Season 2, just so much parallel baiting. Fucking Echo being absent in Act 2, but showing up in Act 1 and 3 briefly, because that happened in Season 1. Oh, we should do it again, but in reality, Echo has no reason to be absent for this much of the season. It works in Season 1, it doesn't work now. But they don't want to write his character, so they just rely on bland surface level parallels from Season 1 to try and make you think that they wrote his character to be deeper than it is. And it's not even just Arcane. I saw a post from the official Netflix account of Stranger Things that showed a bunch of parallels between Season 5 and earlier points of the show. And I'm starting to think this is just a trend for badly written pieces of media to try and link and compare themselves to times where that media was better written and coast off those parallels to trick you into thinking that the writing is better than it is when it's not. But yeah, TLDR to catch you up. The reason season 2 Caitlyn is not comparable to Jinx is because Caitlyn isn't actually written, and in fact is merely just a poor man's version of season 1 Jinx, and the writers write her that way because they have no intention of actually developing her character, and it's easier to just parallel bait, just like everything else in season 2 is. I actually want to elaborate on this a little bit because it's pretty interesting. I didn't even notice this myself. I got it from a review of how Arcane writes its women, but one thing about Arcane is that the women get beat up. As in, like, bloodied, bruised up, missing teeth, drooling, bruised, everything, right? But out of all the fights that they have, I'm not really counting season 2, because season 2 there's some fights that feel weird. Out of all the fights they have, it never feels weird or degrading. Whereas other media will typically have an issue where women get beat up to be humbled, to be put in their place. Even without explicitly being so, that's what it feels like. But Arcane never has that issue. And Arcane has all types of fight. It has one-sided, it has two-sided, it has man versus woman, woman versus woman, unskilled, unmatched, well-matched, all that. And none of the fights, at least in season 1, feel like they're there to degrade a character. And they do that without going into the other extreme of making their fights feel infantilized and unrealistic. Like, no, the fights are real as hell. They don't go the girl boss route of letting the girl never get touched, which feels babying. It's very real, very raw, and yet it never feels brutalizing. It never feels misogynistic. And it's so impressive that it can exist in the spectrum between those two extremes, because what people typically tend to do when addressing stereotypes and bigotry and trying to avoid it is, instead of trying to write it with some type of nuance or thinking about it for like 2 seconds, they just go all the way to the other extreme. It's like how people were trying to combat the rampant over-sexualization of women, which is wrong, which is bad. But they did that by trying to then lean into purity culture, which wasn't helpful for women and was just as misogynistic. That's not how you go. You don't combat one extreme by going all the way to the other extreme. The pendulum's still tilted, it's just the other side now. Yeah, I just think it's really nice that Arcane, at least season 1, can exist in the spectrum between those two extremes in a world where everything has to be one or the other, because no one really wants to put the effort into writing minorities correctly. Season 2, there's some okay fights. So there's some fight. Like when Caitlyn jumps down and beats the fuck out of Vi, that feels degrading. That feels like it's meant to humble Vi and show, oh my god, look how strong Caitlyn's gotten in comparison. That feels degrading. But other than that, it's okay, I guess. Nothing will top season 1 fights. It's just so refreshing to see women be able to actually be written as characters, as people, instead of just something to tiptoe around or something to break. Both glass vases.
Rare digi Arcane post that's not Arcane slander, whoa. Anyways, long story short, a clip of Jinx and Powder first meeting in the alt universe came on my For You page again, and I noticed something that I don't think anyone else has called out. So everyone knows that when Echo looks in the mirror, just before Powder appears, Jinx's reflection shows first. But what I never thought about is that when Jinx appears, she says you're beyond help. I always just assumed this was Powder saying it. But watching the scene again, Powder's lips don't actually move. And in fact, the reflection of Jinx's lips closed before Powder even comes onto screen. And maybe Powder said it off camera, but I also feel like there's a noticeable difference in the intonation between "You're beyond help" and Powder's next spoken line.
You're beyond help. Whoa, relax, Jumpy.
Like, I'm not crazy. There's a very audible difference between how those two lines are said, right? Because in general, Jinx and Powder talk in 2 different tones. Here, I'll show you some clips as an example.
She wasn't always like this. She actually used to be pretty cool. Before I kicked her butt. What is up with you? You've been out of it all day.
Jinx's voice is significantly deeper and more gravelly, more akin to how that "You're beyond help" line was said. And I know what you're thinking. Digi, why does this matter? Why are you going all MatPat over who said what? And it's because I feel like it makes the scene a lot deeper. Initially, I interpreted the scene as Echo being thrown off he was in a new reality. He sees Jinx first because he's expecting to see Jinx first. But the fact that there's a possibility this Jinx spoke to him without anything else being said, I feel like that communicates Echo does frequently hallucinate Jinx to the point where she talks to him. And out the bat, I'm already happy whenever you get to see characters that aren't Jinx hallucinate, because I promise you, girl is not the only one who's got a fucked up head. They all suffer it. But this especially, the idea of Jinx chastising Echo in his thoughts in his mind, seems like a really interesting concept and could have been great had the show actually utilized it to its full potential. And I'm kind of upset that it's wasted on Canon Time Bomb, because Canon Time Bomb is not that good. I don't know what this show was thinking when it had the setup for a bunch of complicated, really intriguing, nuanced relationships and decided to just turn them all into cookie cutter ship bait because they did not want to put effort into writing any of the characters. But I guess that's what fanfiction is for. So all my Time Bomb fanfic writers, I want a fic where Echo argues with Jinx in his mind on my desk by 3 p.m. GMT. You're welcome. Anyways, I hope I'm not embarrassing myself and this is actually something that people realized all along, but I don't know, I feel like when the Arcane fandom figures something out, they post about it 15 times every single day to let people know the fun fact, and I haven't seen anyone say anything about this, so I feel like I'm safe on that front. I can't imagine how confusing it must be to know me purely from my Arcane critical rants, especially my Kate Vi critical rants, or that overall I'm a very loud hater of Caitlyn in season 2, just to come across my Switch AU edits, seeing me edit Caitlyn, Kate Vi, all of that, and thinking to yourself, bitch, I thought you hated them.
You just said that you... You just said that you didn't talk to her.
I mean, I do put the fact that it's an AU at the top of every single video, but every single video I almost always get a comment saying, actually this doesn't make sense. Hey guys, reading is so fun. But yeah, no, every time I imagine that, I just giggle a little bit, especially with the people who are so sure that I just despise the concept of Caitlyn, probably because apparently I hate Asian women. Yep, those 30 plus videos I made, not a single valid critique in there. It's just me saying Caitlyn sucks because she's Asian. And you should definitely not fact check me on that. Just take everything I say at face value. That's what echo chambers are for. And honestly, with their track record, I think those people would find a way to make anything I do with Caitlyn offensive. She used a song from this year in her edit, and within that short time span of 365 days, something bad happened. Therefore, she hates Asian women. It's simple maths. It's not even an exaggeration. They literally call me racist for calling Caitlyn Katie. Okay, I've been sitting on this for a while, but I'm finally ready to share it all with you. Do you guys want to know what is fundamentally hands down the worst scene in Arcane Season 2? Spoiler alert, it does not include Caitlyn Kierman, surprisingly enough. See, whilst we can all agree that Caitlyn Kierman is written quite atrociously in Season 2, she at least has the potential to be redeemed, but this scene? No, this scene has nothing of the sort. The fact that it was even conceived, much less brought about to production, the end times are near, the rapture is gonna happen. That's how bad this scene is. This scene hand by hand desecrates any feeling of stakes or world building that Season 1 painstakingly spent building up. Thinking about this scene almost brings me to the point of tears, not because it is emotionally compelling, but because it is awful. It is a stain on the imprint that humanity has in the arts. Do you want to know what it is?
It's me.
This godforsaken abomination of media is so unholy, I have to imagine it's a punishment for one of the many sins I've committed. Let's put the god-awful, teeth-clenchingly cringy dialogue aside for now and talk about the context of the scene. This scene takes place in the midst of what is basically a war that Jinx is at the center of. She is a severely wanted criminal for her numerous acts of terrorism against Piltover. And on Jinx's side, what is essentially her baby sister has just been kidnapped by enforcers and has been hauled off to a notoriously abusive prison, the same one that her sister was sent to that resulted in them being separated for 7 years. This goofy, lighthearted approach does not make sense for either side in this situation, especially when you take in the context of all the characterization from Season 1. See, as much as I believe centrism was present in Arcane all the way back to Season 1, at the very least, majority of the times the enforcers came on the screen, you could tell they were meant to be the villains. I think the only enforcer that did not commit some kind of on-screen gross abuse of power is Grayson, and she dies in Act 1. Also Caitlyn, but she gets fired in the same episode she's announced as an enforcer, which is something that Season 2 forgot, by the way. Decorated war vet my ass. Jesus Christ, okay, you wanted to be your self-insert, we can tell. Sorry, tangent over. My point is, the show doesn't shy away from showing us how evil the enforcers are. I mean, despite the fact that we get very little about Vi's time in prison, we at least know that the prison ward was literally beating her. And again, mind you, 15-year-old, so yeah, clearly these are some pretty scummy people. And I mean, even the beginning of the episode that this scene comes from, we see enforcers beating Zonites in the street, shooting at them, chasing them, which is why this scene is just so insulting to the integrity of the show. You're telling me this notoriously cruel and abusive group of people have just come across the person that they are searching tirelessly for, and when confronted with them, they just stand there and scoff and don't believe that it's her? Don't even point their gun at her or nothing. They're just like, oh, haha, lol, you're not Jinx. Are you kidding me? Even if she isn't, still get her, right? You guys imprisoned a child, but you're drawing the line at someone who you think isn't Jinx. And what pisses me off is this isn't coming from a genuine place of wanting to portray enforcers as multifaceted. This is them trying to avoid having Jinx shoot this enforcer in the face, which is what she would do, by the way. I don't care how many babies you give to quote-unquote heal this girl. Jinx, the renowned cop killer, being faced with a situation where the enforcers have taken her family from her again, yeah, she's airing the place out. I don't care what you say. And then the damn nerve to give her dialogue that is the equivalent to an unfunny fandom joke that got repeated one too many times. Oh, you're evil, you're evil. Oh my god, guys, she said her pants look funny. Isn't that funny? Isn't that hilarious? Isn't that such a knee slapper? Oh my god, kill me. Rest in peace, Jinx, another Arcane Season 2 character slaughtered by the fact that the writers are cowards. If I had a pence for every time that happened, I'd have 2 pence, which isn't a lot, but it makes me want to cry that it happened even that many times nonetheless. Anyways, my headcanon is that the characters of Season 2 are alien imposters that brutally murdered the cast of the first season. You might think that's a bit gruesome, but I assure you any fate is more merciful than being in Arcane Season 2. You thought it was over? You thought I would ever be done talking about how much of a mess this second season is? You fool! It will never be done. I will be on my deathbed lamenting about how big of a fumble this show was. Anyways, I have got to admit to y'all, I have rewatched Arcane Season 2 in full consecutively once after the show was released. I've watched episodes and bits and pieces here and there multiple times, but a full rewatch, I've only done that once since the initial season came out. And I bring that up because for the first time in a long while, I rewatched Season 2 Episode 1. And by rewatch, I mean I was watching Belize's reaction to it on his Patreon, but it has a full episode, so it's the same thing anyways. My point is, aside from my not liking of how they handled Vi, I did not think that Season 2 Episode 1 was entirely that bad. In general, I think the quality of the second season decreases as the acts go on, and whilst Act 1 is nothing spectacular and nowhere near Season 1, it's better than the rest of Season 2. Or at least so I thought, but upon rewatching that episode, it became evidently clear to me that I was oh so wrong. See, I've talked about how quite a bit of the dialogue in Arcane Season 2 feels a bit Marvel-ish at times, and ends up kind of sacrificing any real stakes and world building for the sake of cheap, lame comedy. Now that issue is something that's mainly prominent in Jinx, but there's a whole other issue with the dialogue that I think I knew the entire time but couldn't put a pin in until recently. Arcane Season 2 writes its dialogue in a way that you would write narration in a book. If you don't know what I mean by that, there are so many metaphors, similes, alliteration, all of that good stuff that you learned in high school that makes a story good, they shove that into the dialogue. You might be thinking, Digi, what
What's wrong with doing that? Aren't those tools that make writing better? Yes, if you're writing a book, if you're writing narration, something like that, not for dialogue. Now don't get me wrong, there are some characters this pretentious riddle-esque speech pattern works for. Victor, Singed, Silco, and Bessa. But considering that Silco is dead and Singed is basically a background character, there is no reason I should be hearing this speech pattern so frequently. Yet everyone talks like this for some reason, especially Caitlyn and Vi. I'm telling you, go to any moment in episode 1, especially a scene between Caitlyn and or Vi, close your eyes and listen to them talk. It sounds like a poem is being read.
No more rogue mission. No more reckless plans. My mother was right. My arrogance led me to take on more than I could handle, and she paid the price.
They wanted the spectacle. Alright, they're trying to scare you. The hole gets smaller, but you never fill it.
Hex tech may keep us alive, Jace. But it's not what will save us.
And whilst poems are beautiful expressions of art, they don't necessarily lend themselves well to character authenticity in dialogue. And this then leads to a situation where whenever there's two characters on screen, it never feels like they're actually having a conversation. Both characters seem like they're off in their own little world having a mental competition for who can have the best soliloquy that gets clipped onto a viral sound on TikTok. And here's the thing with Arcane. Realistic dialogue is one of the best things about season 1. As someone who was mainly into anime before I got into Arcane, and if you know anime dubs, they are definitely something, it was such a breath of fresh air to hear such natural and fluid sounding dialogue. The characters spoke like people, and I could actually believe the chemistry between any two characters on screen at a given time. And that kind of realistic chemistry is hard to attain in even live action, let alone animation. So you can imagine how disappointing it is for the characters to sound so robotic and inhumane in comparison in season 2. And what I'm about to say next is not an accusation, because I'm 99% sure Riot did not use AI on their script, as they've been outspoken against AI before. But the best comparison I have to how the script sounds to me are those Reddit AI stories. In both cases, there's such an unnecessary use of metaphors, similes, alliterations, the power of 3, to the point where I feel like I'm listening to slam poetry, not an actual human being talk. And I promise I'm not just saying that because I think it's bad. Hazbin Hotel is bad, but if you blindfolded me and made me listen to the dialogue, I wouldn't think it's AI. But I would if you did that for Arcane season 2. And that to me just communicates once again how little the writers cared about these characters, and the fact that the season 1 writers were the goats. And mind you, this entire revelation came from only rewatching the first episode. I don't know, man. Look, my birthday's coming up soon, 28th of March, mark your calendars. I think I might actually have to do a live rewatch of Arcane season 2 and just see how long it takes me to lose my fucking mind. I don't know if hate watch parties are a thing, but if that's the case, let me know. Would y'all be into that?